Chapter 14. The Fake Jews of the Synagogue of Satan and the Battle of Armageddon of World War III. A Jewish world empire is emerging. Sooner after the Third World War, this empire will be established as planned by an order called New World Order of the Fake Jews. Now the whole world will be underway in full swing to prepare the Third World War. There will be 3 major battlefields in World War III, one in East Asia, one in Europe, and one in the Middle East, correspondingly to the battles of the US airline against China, NATO against Russia, and the Battle of Armageddon of the US-led World Coalition against Islamic State and or Israel in Megiddo, Israel. The empire is established by the fake Jews. Who are the fake Jews? According to the biblical definition, Revelation 3:9 clearly points out that there are some people who are not Jews but claim that they are Jews. It is obvious that these people are fake Jews. Besides, the Bible says these people are not only liars but also a synagogue of Satan. Let me cite some examples of the fake Jews to you. There are 3 major stylistic Jewish caps. The little one is the most convenient to use. This is Obama, the current US President. He is an African American, not a Jew, but is dressed as a Jew. And there are the former US Presidents George H.W. Bush, Bill Clinton, and George W. Bush. They are Americans, not Jews, but are dressed as Jews. Then there are former UK Prime Ministers Tony Blair and Gordon Brown. They are Englishmen, not Jews, but they are dressed as Jews. There is Koizumi, former Prime Minister of Japan. He is a Japanese, not a Jew, but is also dressed as a Jew. All of these people are fake Jews. They all are also the collaborators of the New World Order.
The New World Order.
A new world order?
A new world order.
It's a new world order.
A new world order.
Is a new world order.
A new international order.
A new world order.
Of a new world order.
New world order.
A new world order.
New world order.
The new world order.
Of opportunity to lead in shaping a new world order. A new world order.
Apart from these global political elites, there are today another 13.5 million of people who claim to be Jews. The world Jewish population is estimated at being 0.2% of the total populace, some 13.5 million. Just over 5.7 million live in Israel, 5.3 million in the US, 500,000 in France, 280,000 in the UK, and 200,000 in Germany as well as in Russia. However, over 90% of them are fake Jews. The Bible says the fake Jews are not only liars but also the synagogue of Satan. The synagogue of Satan is of course the people of Satan. They commit themselves to establish a world empire for Satan to rule the earth. The world empire of Satan will consist of 2 capitals, namely the great city of Babylon and the great city of Jerusalem. They are likely dual capitals cited in the book of Revelation. The city of Babylon is present-day city of New York, which is the financial and administrative capital, whilst the city of Jerusalem is the religious and judicial capital of the empire. In chapter E5, 6667 head, 10-horned beast, and the Persian Gulf War, I have already mentioned that New York is the great city of Babylon. The city of Jerusalem will become their religious and judicial capital. Let the fake Jews introduce their idea to you.
Today, we here at Klavan on the Culture would like to lay out what we consider the only plan likely to bring tranquility, freedom, and justice to the region. The one-state solution in which the entire Middle East is given to the Jews. That's right. The one-state solution is it would not only help the Palestinians, but would instantly achieve the noblest goals of the so-called Arab Spring. For instance, turning the entire Middle East into one big Israel will secure religious freedom for everyone in the area. Big Israel, big Israel, big Israel, big Israel.
The fake Jews wants to make Jerusalem as their worshipping center of their world religions. Their idea fits very well to the prophecies about the nature of Jerusalem in the end time. Revelation 11:8 says, "Their bodies will lie in the public square of the great city, which is figuratively called Sodom and Egypt, where also their Lord was crucified." The Bible states that the great city is a place where the Lord was crucified. We all know that our Lord Jesus was crucified in the city of Jerusalem. In the Life magazine and the Luke magazines of January 16, 1962, David Ben-Gurion, the first Prime Minister of Israel, stated, while still in office, his foreseen will on the role played by Jerusalem. He said, "In Jerusalem, the United Nations will build a shrine of the prophets to serve the federate union of all continents. This will be the seat of the Supreme Court of mankind, to settle all controversies among the federate continents, as prophesied by Isaiah." So it is clear that fake Jews wants to turn the divine city into a city with many pagan gods like that of Egypt. Let's say the flag showing a 6-point star flying over Jerusalem is a symbol of Satan, as well as Egyptian eagle god Horus. I would like to remind you of 3 things concerning the 6-point star. Firstly, the 6-point star is not the Star of David. Ancient people commonly used this sign to represent Satan in the sky, in the practice of cosmic and planetary magic. Ancient Babylonians, for example, assigned Saturn to Satan. Secondly, the Israelites brought the Egyptian idolatry out from Egypt and worshipped these idols in the wilderness, and the Lord would send them into exile beyond Babylon. This shows that the Egyptian idolatry originated from Babylon. Thirdly, this is the first time that the people of Israel have used the symbol of the 6-point star. It is because they lift up the star of the god Rephaim in the wilderness. The 6-point star was brought to the Jewish people again by Solomon as a hexagram when he turned to witchcraft and idolatry after his marriage to Pharaoh's daughter in 922 BC. Secondly, this model in the photo is the Supreme Court of Israel for judiciary proceedings. It sits on a plot of land opposite the Knesset and west of the Temple Mount. The Antichrist will sit here to judge the world. The Rothschild gave the plot of land to the government of Israel to build the Supreme Court. They used their own architects and sponsor all the construction costs. It took them 4 years to build this structure with many secrets of Egyptian idolatry built into it. For example, the first thing you will notice is the pyramid with the all-seeing eye. It is just like the one you can see on the American dollar bill. It sits in a circle to the left. The all-seeing eye is also the eye of the Egyptian sun god Osiris or Ra. Third and lastly, outside the courtyard, there is an obelisk like the one you can see in front of the White House. Obelisks like these were used by ancient Egyptians to worship their sun god. If we look further away from the Supreme Court, we can see many 6-point stars flags flying over the Israel's Parliament building, the Knesset. Just like the one you see on the American dollar bill, it sits in a circle to the right. The 6-point stars also represents the Egyptian god Rephaim and the eagle god Horus, the son of the sun god Osiris.
Oh, Jerusalem, the twin sister of New York, you dress like your sister, the city of Great Babylon, mother of prostitutes and of the abomination of the earth. With you the kings of the earth committed adultery, and the inhabitants of the earth were intoxicated with the wine of your adulteries. Therefore the Lord no longer calls you the city of peace, but figuratively and directly calls you as Egypt.
Do you know that Israel, especially its capital, Tel Aviv, is well known for homosexuality? Tel Aviv triumphs New York, its twin sister, to be named world's best gay city, the #1 gay city of the world. Therefore we may not wonder why the Lord figuratively calls Jerusalem as Sodom. In my previous chapter 13, I told you what had been happening in the Euphrates. The Battle of Armageddon in the land of Israel is designed to pave the way towards establishing a large region, or so-called Greater Israel, as a buffer zone to protect the world's religious and judiciary capital in Jerusalem. In order to ensure the safety and security of its inner core, a large buffer zone has to be created. The Yunnan Plan is a policy discussion paper proposed by Oded Yunnan, an Israeli journalist formerly attached to the Israeli Foreign Ministry back in 1982. He published a paper entitled A Strategy for Israel in the 1980s. He suggested that in order for Israel to maintain its regional superiority, it must fragment its surrounding Arab states into smaller units. The document, later labeled as the Yunnan Plan, implied that Arabs and Muslims killing each other in endless sectarian wars was in effect a kind of interim policy for Israel. As a result, the security buffer zone was to be extended from the Euphrates in the north and the Nile in the south, and then the Greater Israel would be established. Thus, according to the Yunnan Plan, those countries surrounding Israel that were threatening its existence had to be weakened, fragmented, or even toppled. This plan has been being carried out by the U.S. since 2001, but the U.S. called it Greater Middle East Plan. Now let the former U.S. four-star General Wesley gives you some curious facts.
What happened in 9/11 is we didn't have a strategy, we didn't have bipartisan agreement, we didn't have American understanding of it, and we had instead a policy coup in this country. A coup. A policy coup. Some hard-nosed people took over the direction of American policy, and they never bothered to inform the rest of us. I went through the Pentagon 10 days after 9/11. I couldn't stay away from Mother Army. I went back there to see Don Rumsfeld. I'd worked for him as a White House fellow in the 1970s. All this is in the book. And I said, am I doing okay on CNN? He said, yeah, fine. He said, I'm thinking about it. He says, I read your book. And he said, this is a book that talks about the Kosovo campaign. And he said, I just want to tell you, he said, nobody's going to tell us where or when we can bomb. Nobody. He said, I'm thinking of calling this a floating coalition. What do you think about that? I said, well, sir, thanks for reading my book. And, he said, thanks. That's all the time I've got. Really? And I went downstairs. I was leaving the Pentagon, and an officer from the Joint Staff called me into his office, and he said, I want you to know, he said, sir, we're going to attack Iraq. And I said, why? He said, we don't know. He said, I said, well, did they tie Saddam to 9/11? He said, no. He said, but I guess they don't know what to do about terrorism, and so they think, but they can attack states, and they want to look strong, and so I guess they think if they take down a state, it will intimidate the terrorist. And you know, it's like that old saying, he said, if the only tool you have is a hammer, then every problem has to be a nail. Well, I walked out of there pretty upset, and then we attacked Afghanistan. I was pretty happy about that. We should have. And then I came back to the Pentagon about 6 weeks later. I saw the same officer. I said, why haven't we attacked Iraq? We still going to attack Iraq? He said, oh, sir. He says, it's worse than that. He said, he pulled up a piece of paper off his desk. He said, I just got this memo from the Secretary of Defense's office that says we're going to attack and destroy the governments in 7 countries in 5 years. We're going to start with Iraq, and then we're going to move to Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and Iran. I said, 7 countries in 5 years. I said, is that a classified memo? He said, yes, sir. I said, well, don't show it to me. He was about to show it to me. He said, because I want to talk about it. And I sat on this information for a long time, for about 6 or 8 months. I was so stunned by this, I couldn't begin to talk about it. And I couldn't believe it would really be true.
The facts given by General Wesley are very disturbing and ridiculous. To him, how could his former colleague in a very high position in the Pentagon not know the reason for taking down 7 countries? Of course, there are actually no sound reasons to take these countries down. The US is to act in accordance with the predetermined plan made by the fake Jews, so it needs to find some excuse to weaken or destroy these countries. Let's say they manipulate a 9/11 attack at home to create sufficient motivation to tackle the terrorist threat abroad. They claim that Iraq possessed weapons of mass destruction, so they destroyed Iraq in 2003 and killed Saddam Hussein. They created the threat of ISIS, ISIL or Islamic State so that they could go up against them as an excuse to invade Iraq again as well as Syria. Let's listen to Obama's speech against ISIS on September 10, 2014.
Moreover, I've made it clear that we will hunt down terrorists who threaten our country wherever they are. That means I will not hesitate to take action against ISIL in Syria. That means I will not hesitate to take action against ISIL in Syria. That means I will not hesitate to take action against ISIL in Syria.
You see how easy for the US to find an excuse to topple Syria? In 2011, the US claimed the Libyan government used heavy weapons to kill its people. Thereafter, NATO invaded Libya and killed Gaddafi. Libya is now in chaos. After the killing of 20 Egyptian Christians by the Islamic State, the US-led coalition attacked the Islamic militant in Libya again in early February 2015, intent on eradicating them. Up to now, among the 7 countries, 6 of them have already been or been being weakened, fragmented or toppled. Please be reminded that Iran is the only country left and has become the final target. I tell you, Iran will fall into the trap set by the US and Israel. Iran will join the US-led World Coalition force to attack the Islamic State or Israel in the Battle of Armageddon at Megiddo, Israel, in the very near future. By that time, Iran will be destroyed. In the following, the main concern is to explore the role played by the people of God and the Synagogue of Satan in the books of Revelation and Ezekiel in the Battle of Armageddon, the greatest battle of the Third World War. I would like to separate our discussion into 4 parts. Firstly, to consider the difference between the real and fake Jews. Secondly, to consider whether the fake Jews or the people of God come from and how they become Jews. Lastly, to consider how and why the New World Order of the fake Jews comes into being. Let me start with the relation between Satan and the plan of the New World Order. The plan of the New World Order plan is spiritually based. It is a conflict between God and his forces on the one hand, and Satan and his demonic forces on the other hand. Those who are not familiar with the biblical doctrines concerning God and Satan, or scriptural prophecies, cannot possibly comprehend the nature of the struggle facing the world today. Let's start with Satan's plan for the world. Satan opposed the presence and purpose of God in the world. His name, Lucifer, means great shining light or son of the morning. Satan had 5 dreams mentioned in Isaiah 14. I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. Certainly Satan wants to be like God and to rule over the earth from the mount of the congregations or assembly in the sides of the north. Psalm 48 affirms that the mount in the sides of the north is the mount of Mount Zion, which is the real divine mountain. For it is here that the Lord God of Israel lives and rules over the nations. According to Psalm 48 and Luke 1, the plan of God's rule over the earth is that he chose Israel as his people from whom a Messiah, that is Jesus, is given to us. He will sit on the throne of David at his kingdom over Mount Zion. And from Mount Zion he judges and governs the earth with peace and justice. And his kingdom is forever. Satan wants to be like God and sets a goal to rule over the earth by imitating God's plan. Firstly, Satan chose his people to rule over the earth. These people should be the Synagogue of Satan quoted by the Bible. In other words, the fake Jews are the people of Satan. Secondly, the synagogue will establish a world government. A false Messiah will be elected when the world government has been formed. Christians may call him the Antichrist. Thirdly, the Synagogue of Satan selects Mount Zion as the headquarters of the world government. Therefore, their king or Antichrist will sit on his throne on Mount Zion to rule the earth. However, the Antichrist will rule the earth by tyranny, and his kingdom will be short-lived. It is because Satan and his kingdom will be put into the hell of fire immediately after the Lord Jesus comes. Do you know, up to this day, by means of a Zionist movement, the fake Jews have already captured Mount Zion and are now pushing hard to establish a seat there for their religious king of the one world government. Now let's go back to the first part of our discussion, the difference between the real and fake Jews. Revelation foretells the great battle at Armageddon in Israel, leading to the judgment of the Lord, is led by Gog and Magog. However, Ezekiel foretells the war at the valley Armageddon in Israel is led by Gog from the land of Magog. Both scriptures reveal that God invades the land of Israel before the Lord comes to judge the world. As a matter of fact, most of the people now living in Israel are the people of God, who formerly captured the land of Israel since 1948.
ביום שישי, ה' באייר תש"ח, 14 במאי 1948, אחר הצהריים, באו המוזמנים אל בניין מוזיאון תל אביב בשדרות רוטשילד 16. סמוך לשעה 4 הגיע דוד בן גוריון. כל חייו היו מסע אל הרגע הזה.
זוהי זכותו הטבעית של העם היהודי, להיות ככל עם ועם עומד ברשות עצמו במדינתו הריבונית, אשר תפתח לרווחה את שערי המולדת לכל יהודי, ותעניק לעם היהודי מעמד של אומה שוות זכויות בתוך העמים. לפיכך נתכנסנו, אנו חברי מועצת העם, נציגי היישוב העברי והתנועה הציונית, ביום סיום המנדט הבריטי על ארץ ישראל. ותוקף זכותנו הטבעית וההיסטורית, ועל יסוד החלטת עצרת האומות המאוחדות, אנו מכריזים בזאת על הקמת מדינה יהודית בארץ ישראל, היא מדינת ישראל.
Of the 5.7 million Jews living in Israel today, more than 80% are white Europeans. Less than 20% are Palestinian or black Jews. David Ben-Gurion, the first Prime Minister of Israel, and also other guests invited to participate in the ceremony of the Declarations of Independence of the Jewish State of Israel, were mostly white Europeans, claiming they were Jews and the descendants of Abraham. Let's analyze the biblical stories to help us differentiate between the real Jews and the fake ones. The stories of Joseph, the man second to the Pharaoh of Egypt, Moses, the national leader of Israel, bringing the people of Israel out from Egypt, and the exile of Jesus to Egypt demonstrate the racial characteristics of the Hebrews. Because time is short, I will share with you the story of Jesus to illustrate this point. According to the book of Matthew, around 2,000 years ago, when King Herod was mocked by the wise men, he became very angry and sent his men to slay all the children in Bethlehem from 2 years old and under. Joseph and Mary were told by an angel to flee. Wait a minute. If you were Joseph or Mary, please choose a suitable color for the skin of Jesus before deciding where to go. Will you choose white or dark brown? If you choose white, then you had better go to Europe to hide your son because Europeans are white. If you choose dark brown, then you better go to Egypt because Egyptians are dark brown, right? That's why the angel told Joseph and Mary to take Jesus to Egypt, because 2,000 years ago, the skin color of both the Hebrews and Egyptians was dark brown. Today, Egyptian skin color is still dark brown. So, why not for most of the Jews? This story shows that those white Jews living in Israel today are fake, and the dark-skinned one are the real Jews. As a matter of fact, the nation of Israel today has been hijacked by white European fake Jews. Now let's proceed to the second part and trace the origin of the fake European Jews. 1,000 years before the establishment of the modern state of Israel, during the period of Tang dynasties of China, the westernmost border of China was far beyond present-day border, nearly as far as Samarkand in present-day Uzbekistan. On the eastern fringe of Europe, close by the Eastern European plain, there was a Jewish kingdom known as Khazaria or Kaiser Empire, comprising the drainage areas of the Don and Volga rivers. The people were called Khazars. They were Europeans in origin but converted to Judaism. Only during the last several decades, however, has documented evidence come to light from ancient manuscripts to reveal the astonishing historical truth of this ancient kingdom and its connection to the origins of modern-day Israel. But let me not deviate too much. It is not my intention to develop deep into the history of Khazaria, but rather to explore the biblical significance. It was the death of Attila the Hun in 453 that precipitated the collapse of Hunnic Empire and left an Eastern European power vacuum which the Khazars eventually filled. They then proceeded to subjugate all their neighbors, the surrounding tribes, to the extent that after being defeated, the tribes went virtually unmentioned in subsequent historical accounts. The Khazars just swallowed them up and firmly established their kingdom called Khazaria or the Kaiser Empire. At its maximum extent in the 9th century, the empire occupied an immense area of land, over 1 million square miles extending from western Hungary or Austria, east-west to Kiev of Russia, and to the Ural Sea, north to the Upper Volga, and its southern region extending to the Caucasus Mountains between the Black and Caspian Seas. At the peak of their empire, it is believed the Khazars have a permanent standing army possibly numbering as many as 100,000. Astonishingly, they controlled and exact tributes from 30 different nations and tribes inhabiting their vast territories. There are several things I would like you to bear in mind. Firstly, Khazaria was once a large empire with two kings, called Berk and Kagan. Berk was a military and executive king, and Kagan was a religious king. The former was a visible governor, and the latter an invisible one. The Khazar army took their orders from King Berk. The two king systems of Khazaria will be propagated into the Jewish world empire. As mentioned earlier, the world empire will consist of two capitals, one in New York and another in Jerusalem. Let's say, for example, the Pope as a religious king sits in Jerusalem, while Obama, an administrative king, sits in New York. Interestingly, the U.S. also has two kings. One is visible while another is invisible. Let the 28th President of the United States, Mr. Woodrow Wilson, reflect this fact to you. In his book entitled The New Freedom, published in 1913, Woodrow Wilson stated, "Since I entered politics, I have chiefly had men's view conveyed to me privately. Even some of the biggest men in the United States in the field of commerce and manufacturing are afraid of somebody or something. They seem to know that there is a hidden power so organized, so subtle, so watchful, so interlocked, so complete, so pervasive that they dare not speak above their breath when they speak in condemnation of it. He also stated, after signing the Federal Reserve Act on December 23, 1913, "I am a most unhappy man. I have unwittingly ruined my country. A great industrial nation is controlled by a system of credit. We are no longer a government by free opinion, no longer a government by conviction and the vote of the majority, but a government by the opinion and duress of a small group of dominant men." To Mr. Wilson, behind the curtain, there was a small group of dominant men controlling the U.S. system of credit. This small group of men was, in effect, the invisible government manipulating the visible government of the United States. This invisible government was so organized, so subtle, so watchful, so interlocked, so complete, and so pervasive. Now let's refer back to the history of Caesarea. The second thing I want you to bear in mind is the cases were the people of God and Magog. The 9th century monk Dromarch of Aquitaine, in his commentary on Matthew 24:14, in Expositia in Metaphysium Evangelicia, stated that the Khazari or Khazars dwelt in the lands of God and Magog. Furthermore, Alan Brooke cites in The Jews of Caesarea, Heinrich von Neustadt, around 1300, wrote of them as the terrifying people of God and Magog. In addition, Lyman Coleman, in his historical textbook and Atlas of Biblical Geography, has provided us with a geographical proof of the Hebrew view of the ancient world. The location of Magog was situated on the northwestern coast of the Caspian Sea, north of the Caucasus Mountains, comprising present-day southern Russia, Georgia, and Armenia, exactly the extent of the core of Caesarea in the past. Thus, these three documents further affirm that the Khazars were the peoples of God living in the land of Magog. Another thing I would like you to bear in mind is that Ezekiel foretells God will lead his people out from the land of Magog to invade the land of Israel in the end time. Now let's move on to investigate the bloodline of the people of Khazar. According to an ancient document entitled King Joseph's Reply to Hester ibn Soprat, King Joseph traced his ancestries not to Shem, but to Noah's third son, Japheth, or more precisely, Japheth's grandson Togarmah, the ancestor of all Turkish tribes. The document was part of an exchange of letters in the 950s between Joseph, a later king of Caesarea, and Hester ibn Soprat, the foreign secretaries to the Caliphate of Cordoba. Joseph stated, "We are descended from Japheth through his sons Togarmah. I am a descendant of Khazar, the seventh son of Togarmah." According to Genesis 10, Noah had 3 sons, Sem, Ham, and Japheth. Japheth had 7 sons, including Gomer, Magog, Tubal, Meshach, etc. And Gomer had 3 sons, including Ashkenaz, Riphath, and Togarmah. By and large, the Khazars were 100% of Turkic European origin. Another point to bear in mind is that the son of Japheth, Togarmah, as mentioned in the letter, was also one of the central figures of Ezekiel prophecy. Ezekiel 38 states that God is the chief prince of Meshach and Tubal. He rises out of the land of Magog, and he will wage war against the people of Israel in the land of Israel in the end time. Gomer and all his bands, the house of Togarmah of the north quarters, and all his bands are also with him. You see, the peoples of God are also the peoples of Magog, Meshach, Tubal, Gomer, and Togarmah, and the family tree under Japheth. As a result, the Khazars were not only a clan of white Europeans called Gaul, living in the land of Magog in the past, but history would show them to become invaders of Israel. I will take up this point again later when I discuss the creation of the modern state of Israel. Now let's move on to investigate the religion of the Khazars. The Khazars were a pagan civilization with a mix of phallus worship and other forms of idolatrous worship practiced in Asia by other pagan nations. The former pagan worship continued into 7th century with various forms of sexual excesses and nudeness indulged in by the Khazars as part of their religious beliefs. This form of worship produced to a large degree of moral degeneracy that the Khazarian king could no longer endure. In the 7th century, the ruler at that time, King Baulan, decided to end the practice of phallus worship and all other forms of idolatrous worship and institute one of the three monotheistic religions as the new Khazarian state religion. The empire was surrounded by the Islamic Eastern Caliphate of Persia and the Christian Byzantine Empire. King Baulan may have chosen Judaism as their state religion to avoid being religiously and consequently politically dominated by either empire. The advantages were they could avoid being labeled as heathens while at the same time remaining independent of their powerful neighbors. After an historical section with representatives from the three monotheistic religions, King Baulan decided to adopt Talmudism over Islam and Christianity, so this became the new state religion. Talmudism, as it was known then, is practiced today as Judaism. King Baulan and his 4,000 feudal nobles were promptly converted by rabbis imported from Babylonia for the event. Phallus worship and other forms of idol worship were thereafter forbidden. The Khazarian kings invited large numbers of rabbis from Babylon and its vicinity to open synagogues and schools in order to instruct the population in the new state religion. After the mass conversion of the king and his empire, it was decreed that no person other than a so-called or self-styled Jew could occupy the Khazarian throne. The empire became a virtual theocracy with religious leaders being the civil administrators as well. During this time, the Talmud modified to protect their state religion from outside religious influences and to prevent a return to the previous veil worship styles. By the start of the 10th century, Judaism gained a stronghold among the common Khazar people, and the Hebrew script came into use in Khazaria. The ideologies of the Talmud became the axis of political, cultural, economic, and social attitudes and activities throughout the Khazarian kingdom. The Talmud provides civil and religious law, no matter what the Khazars thought of themselves. The fact is that they had no blood relation with the people of Israel, but became Jews by conversion to Talmudic Judaism. So even though they called themselves Jews, they were actually fake Jews. Along with the passage of centuries of time, the fake Khazarian Jews firmly and unmistakably identified themselves as having the bloodline of Israel, as being the chosen people of God of Israel and entitled to own the promised land of Israel. More astonishingly, they not only regard as being the chosen people of God and descendants of Israel, they also believed that they were superior to the Gentiles, and this was further extended to a belief that they would be the rulers of the world. It is written in the Bible they are the Synagogue of Satan, those who claim to be Jews though they are not, and also are liars. Now let's explore where the Khazarian Jews go. For this we need to refer back to the history of Khazaria. The Khazarian kingdom reached its peak of power and world influence in the later half of the 8th century. The empire started to weaken first by the invasion of Vikings, who were also called Rush. from whom are descended, among others, the Russians. These Rush Vikings are vigorous and courageous. When they descend on open ground, they destroyed all who stood in their way, including the Khazars. They took possession of the women and put them into slavery. As a result, the western part of the Khazarian Empire was lost to the Vikings and ruled over by a city-state of Kiev called Rush. The Khazars there retained some of their Jewish traditions and culture, but were strongly influenced by the Rush Vikings. Centuries later, the Khazars under the rule of Rush began to take on a different appearance from those in other parts of the former Khazar Empire. The Khazars are generally considered by historians to have been of Turkic stock, which means they would have been dark-haired. Under the influence of the Vikings in Rush, the Khazars looked like the Vikings. Vikings were red-haired people. As a result, Russian Khazarian Jews living in Rush inherit the one distinctive characteristic of red hair. They were called Red Jews. It is because some academics have speculated that Rush is a Scandinavian word in origin. For instance, it could be linked with the word for red hair, Russi. They speculated that it may be linked to the Russian word Russi, meaning light brown, so with the Latin and English words Russus, meaning red-brown, and russet, meaning rusty, respectively, used to describe hair color. We now go back to the history of Khazaria, where later on, the weakening of the Khazar military influence no longer made them a powerful force, especially on their eastern borders against the rising power of Mongols. But before and after the Mongol uprising, the Khazars, especially those in Rush, sent many offshoots into the unsubdued Slavonic lands, helping ultimately to build up to the great Jewish centers of Eastern Europe. The Khazarian Jewish religion outlasted the kingdom itself and was transplanted holistically into the Eastern European settlements of Hungary, Poland, and the later Russia. In conclusion, please be reminded that most Khazarian Jews in Eastern Europe originate from the land of Rush. They can be regarded as Rush Jews, or later the Russian Jews. The Mongols invaded Kiev and Rush in the 13th century, destroying numerous cities including Kiev, Kolomna, Moscow, Vladimir, and Ryazan. All Russian states were forced to submit to Mongol rule and become part of the Golden Hurdle Empire, parts of which last until 1480. The invasion led to the beginning of the breakup of Kievan Rush, resulting in the division of the East Slavic people into three separate nations: modern-day Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus. This invasion also led to a massive westward migration of the Russian Jews into the Eastern European settlements of Hungary, Poland, and Russia. This more recent diaspora resulted in a strong and politically overwhelming Russian Jewish influence, especially in Hungary and Poland, but also throughout the whole of Eastern Europe. Jews attained positions of power and political influence in virtually every major category of life, business, and society. There may have already been a small populations of real Jews living in that region. Let's take Germany as an example. The Encyclopedia Britannica points out towards the end of the 9th century Jewish settlements of Germany that were mostly of Semitic origin had been virtually wiped out by the mob hysteria that resulted from the First Crusade in 1096. But there can be little doubt that the majority of modern Jewry originated in the migratory waves of Russian Khazars who played such a dominant part in early Eastern European history. In the later centuries, the Russian Khazars further migrated into the Central Europe such as Germany and Switzerland. From then on, the Ashkenazi name started to appear amongst Khazarian Jews in Central Europe. So in short, The mainstream of Khazarian Jews flowed consistently in a westerly direction from the Caucasus through the Ukraine into Poland and hence into Central Europe. For convenience, I would like to classify the present-day Jews into two categories according to their place of origin. Those Jews originating from Central Europe are called Ashkenazi Jews, and those coming from the territories of Russia are called Russian Jews. Furthermore, I will separate the Ashkenazi and Russian Jews into two groups in terms of hair color. Jews possessing Turkic characteristics I will call white Jews, and Jews possessing the characteristic of red hair I call red Jews. Both Ashkenazi and Russian Jews actually contain both colors. However, they are all European or fake Jews. Let's move now to the questions of how and why the New World Order of fake Jews came into being. The New World Order arises out of the tragic history of the Khazarian Jews. After the massive westward migration, the Khazarian Jews settled in Eastern and Central Europe in early 13th century. Khazarian Jewish communities exist continuously in Europe ever since they arrived. Many of these communities were older than the countries in which they exist. Nevertheless, as the countries of Europe developed, Jews were rarely given the full status of citizenship. At best, they were tolerated as guests. Their social and religious distinctiveness make them persistent targets for persecution. Here below is a list of their tragic history. The persecution of these fake Jews since the early 13th century. As a short summary of the above lengthy history of the Jews in Europe, several categories of Jewish persecutions are identified. From the early 13th centuries to 1948, Jews lived in a tragic way of life. In the Middle Ages, Christianity was the foundational religion of Europe. The Jewish people were viewed differently by Christian people, and they were treated as the Christians' worst enemies. Christians were afraid that the Jews would spread their false teachings. If the Jewish people spread their teachings, the Christian religion would lose supporters. By law, Jews in most cities were segregated in ghettos. Distinctive cap and dunce caps were mandatory in many European cities for Jews when they went out of the ghetto to assure they were set apart when walking among Christians. German Jews were marked with a yellow circle too. The Jewish people were blamed for nearly everything that was going wrong in the community. The Christians blamed the Jewish people for the crucifixion of Jesus and accused them of performing anti-Christian rituals and killing Christian children in those rituals. The Jewish people were often the scapegoats of the community and blamed by the Christians for problems for which they had no control. The Black Plague wiped out 1/3 to 3/4 of Western Europe in the 14th century. However, Jews were accused of causing the pandemic plague by deliberately poisoning Christians' wells. Jews were also accused of kidnapping and murdering Christian children to use their blood in Passover rituals. This accusation is also called the blood libel. Despite the protests of Pope Clement VI, over 60 large and 150 small Jewish communities in Basel and Zurich were destroyed as a direct result of the blood libel accusations. The German law codex shows that the Jews were depicted as the bottommost class of society. Actually, they were some of the most skillful tradesmen in all of Europe, but because of their religion, many jobs were closed to them. Many specialized in medicine, but were not allowed to treat Christian people. The Jewish people could not get the same jobs that Christians had. Therefore, they make much less money. The majority of Jews were poor. The livelihood most commonly associated with Jews in Europe over the centuries was lending money at interest, a practice forbidden to Christians by church law. Jews were channeled into this revealed profession as one of the few ways left for them to make a living. Between 1290 and 1550, England, France, and most of Southern and Eastern Europe expelled their Jewish populations. At least once, and sometimes several times, the photo shows one of the many examples where Jews were expelled from Frankfurt on August 23, 1614. The expulsion followed riots against the Jews led by their economic rivals. 1,380 persons, old and young, were counted at the exits of the gate and herded onto ships on the River Main. In a word, persecutions made the European Jews poor, weak, and segregated into many small communities. However, persecutions tied them together. Each of them belonged in every fiber of his being to a community in which he was completely absorbed. It also made them very clever at surviving their harsh living environment. Even when the Jews thought about their future, they did not have sufficient force to rebel against any nation, even a very small one. This was because they were marked and segregated. Only prayers and dreams could comfort them. They would face Jerusalem and pray daily for restoration of their scattered nations to Zion, Jerusalem, for a return to Zion. Their common farewell saying was, "Next year, see you in Jerusalem." They dreamed of the land promised to their forefather Abraham, a Messiah from their people, sitting on the throne of David, ruling the whole earth from Mount Zion. This was their vision of the new world. Present Israeli prime ministers can express their feeling.
For 2,000 years, my people, the Jewish people, were stateless, defenseless, voiceless. We were utterly powerless against our enemies who swore to destroy us. We suffered relentless persecution and horrific attacks. We could never speak in our own behalf, and we could not defend ourselves. Well, no more. No more.
This lengthy history gave them enough time to think. Wise men gathered together to discuss different plans to achieve their dream of the new world. They knew their plan was not to be by revolution, but by subversion. They also knew that the only, yet most powerful tool they had to achieve their plan was their ability to amass wealth and money by lending money at interest. Once they had amassed sufficient amount of money, they could manipulate and control the world like the Jewish bankers manipulate the world today. Finally, they put together what is now the most well-known plan, recorded as the Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion. The Age of Enlightenment gave the Jews a chance. The Age of Enlightenment was a cultural movement of intellectuals beginning in the late 17th and 18th centuries Europe, emphasizing reason and individualism rather than tradition. It was sparked by philosophers such as Voltaire and Rousseau and intellectuals such as Isaac Newton. Its purpose was to reform society using reason, challenge ideas grounded in tradition and faith, and advance knowledge through the scientific method. It promoted scientific thought, skepticism, and intellectual interchange. The ideas of the Enlightenment have had a long-term major impact on the culture, politics, and governments of the Western world. There was much talk of ways to reform society with toleration, equality, and freedom. The bondage of the Jews was, to a great extent, loosened. This gave them a chance to get to do more into the money-lending business. In the following, the Rothschild family will be used as an example to illustrate how the Jews carried out their plan. It is because the Rothschilds were and still are the most powerful and influential Jewish family in the world. In 1743, a goldsmith and moneylender named Moses M. Bauer opened a corn shop in Frankfurt, Germany. He was an Ashkenazi Jew. When his son Mayer M. Bauer was born, Moses placed a red sign above the entrance door of his corn shop. Some years after his father's death in 1755, Mayer returned to Frankfurt to take over his father's business. Mayer recognized the significance of the red hexagram and changed his family name from Bauer to Rothschild, and put the red hexagram sign, signifying 666, hanging over the entrance door. The meaning of Rothschild is that Roth is German for red, Schild is German for sign. This red hexagram sign under Rothschild instruction finds a place on the Israeli flag some 2 centuries later. It was at this point that the House of Rothschild came into being. Mayer Rothschild learned that lending money to governments and kings was much more profitable than lending to private individuals. Not only were the loans bigger, but also were secured by the nation's taxes, and in addition Rothschild could gain political influence. Mayer Rothschild had 5 sons, Amsher, Solomon, Nathan, Karl, and Jacob. Mayer spent the rest of his life instructing them in all the secrets of money creation and manipulation. As they came of age, he sent them to the major cities of Europe to open branch office of the family banking business. Amsher stayed in Frankfurt, Solomon was sent to Vienna, Nathan was sent to London, Karl went to Naples, and Jacob went to Paris. Although other sons became astute branch managers, Nathan exhibits a superior affinity for the banking business. When he got to London, he became a merchant banker and began to cement ties between the House of Rothschild and the Bank of England. The House of Rothschild continued to buy and sell bullion and rare coins. Through their shrewd business transactions, they successfully bought out or dismantled most of the competition in Europe. In 1770, Mayer Amsher Rothschild drew up plans for the creations of the Illuminati and entrusted his Ashkenazi fellow, Adam Weishaupt, with its organization and development. The Illuminati was to be based upon the teachings of the Talmud, which is in turn the teachings of rabbinical Jews. The Illuminati was a name used by a German sect that existed in the 15th century. They practiced the occult and professed to possess the night that Lucifer had retained when he became Satan. In 1776, Adam Weishaupt officially completed his organization of the Illuminati on May 1 of this year. The purpose of the Illuminati is to divide the Goyim or all Jews by political, economic, social, and religious means. The opposing sides were to be armed and incidents were to be provided in order for them to fight amongst themselves, destroy national governments, destroy religious institutions, and eventually destroy each other. Weishaupt soon infiltrated the Freemasonry in the British colony in America with this Illuminati doctrine and established lodges of the Grand Orient to be their secret headquarters. The Illuminati took over the control of the later U.S. government through these lodges. For details, please refer to Chapter 12, 666, 200 Beast, the Illuminati, A New World Order, and World War III. At the end of the 19th century, in Europe, the overall social status of the Jews was raised and their influence was secure. The Jewish community openly demanded a land for establishing a nation for their people. In 1897, the first Zionist Congress was held in Basel, Switzerland. At this Congress, it was decided to work towards the establishment of a Jewish state, and a search for land on which to build this Jewish state began. the Zionists started to push forward this political movement to establish a Jewish state in Zion. This movement is called the Zionist movement. Wealthy Jews from Germany, France and England, especially the Rothschild family, support the movement financially and politically. In 1903, Great Britain offered the Zionists land in Africa. This was rejected by the Zionists. They wanted Mount Zion in Palestine. At the time, Palestine was inhabited by 500,000 Palestinian Arabs and a few Palestinian Jews, who are blood related and who had lived together in peace for centuries. With Palestine as their choice for a homeland, European Ashkenazi Jews began migrating to Palestine. As I have mentioned earlier, these Ashkenazi Jews are the people of God. So this migration was the beginning of the invasion of God into the land of Israel. However, the wave of migration was so weak that it was not strong enough to establish a nation. So they waited for another chance, which came with the advent of the First World War. Now let Mr. Benjamin Friedman tell you how the fake Jews manipulated the United States to enter into World War I with Great Britain in order to gain Palestine. Please pay serious attention to his first-person testimony.
Benjamin H. Friedman was one of the most intriguing and amazing individuals of the 20th century. Mr. Friedman, born in 1890, was a successful Jewish businessman of New York City who was at one time the principal owner of the Woodbury Soap Company. He broke with organized Jewry after World War II and spent the remainder of his life and the great preponderance of his considerable fortune, at least $2.5 million, exposing the Jewish power structure which dominates the United States. Mr. Friedman was personally acquainted with Bernard Baruch, Samuel Untermeyer, Woodrow Wilson, Franklin Roosevelt, Joseph Kennedy, John F. Kennedy, and many more movers and shakers of our times. This speech was given before a patriotic audience in 1961 at the Willard Hotel in Washington, D.C.
Here in the United States, the Zionists and their co-religionists have complete control of our government. The Zionists and their co-religionists rule this United States as though they were the absolute monarchs of this country. Now you say, well, that's a very broad statement to make, but let me show what happened while you were, I don't want to wear that out. Let me show you what happened while we were all asleep. I'm including myself with you. We were all asleep. What happened? World War I broke out in the summer of 1914. 1914 was the year in which World War I broke out. There are a few people here my age who remember that. Now that war was waged on one side by Great Britain, France, and Russia, and on the other side by Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Turkey. What happened? Within 2 years, Germany had won that war. Not alone won it nominally, but won it actually. The German submarines, which were a surprise to the world, had swept all the convoys from the Atlantic Ocean, and Great Britain stood there without ammunition for her soldiers, stood there with 1 week's food supply facing her, and after that, starvation. At that time, the French army had mutinied. They lost 600,000 of the flower of the French youth in the defense of Verdun on the Somme. The Russian army was defecting. They were picking up their toys and going home. They didn't want to play war anymore. They didn't like the Tsar. And the Italian army had collapsed. Now, Germany, not a shot had been fired on the German soil. Not an enemy soldier had crossed the border into Germany. And yet, here was Germany offering England peace terms. They offered England a negotiated peace on what the lawyers call a status quo ante basis. That means let's call the war off and let everything be as it was before the war started. Well, England in the summer of 1916 was considering that seriously. They had no choice. They was either accepting this negotiated peace that Germany was magnanimously offering them, or going on with the war and being totally defeated. While that was going on, the Zionists in Germany, who represented the Zionists from Eastern Europe, went to the British War Cabinet, and I'm going to be brief because this is a long story, but I have all the documents to prove any statement that I make if anyone here is curious or doesn't believe what I am possible. The Zionists in London went to the British War Cabinet and they said, look here, you can yet win this war. You don't have to give up. You don't have to accept the negotiated peace offered to you now by Germany. You can win this war if the United States will come in as your ally. The United States was not in the war at that time. We were fresh, we were young, we were rich, we were powerful. And they told England, we will guarantee to bring the United States into the war as your ally, to fight with you on your side, if you will promise us Palestine after you win the war. In other words, they made this deal. We will get the United States into this war as your ally. The price you must pay us is Palestine after you have won the war and defeated Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Turkey. Now, England had as much right to promise Palestine to anybody as the United States would have to promise Japan to Ireland for any reason whatsoever. It's absolutely absurd that Great Britain, that never had any connection or any interest or any right in what is known as Palestine, should offer it as coin of the realm to pay the Zionists for bringing the United States into the war. However, they made that promise in October of 1916. October 1916. And shortly after that, I don't know how many here remember it, the United States, which was almost totally pro-German, because the newspapers here were controlled by Jews, the bankers were Jews, all the media of mass communications in this country were controlled by Jews, and they were pro-German because their people, in a majority of cases, came from Germany, and they wanted to see Germany lick the Tsar. The Jews didn't like the Tsar, and they didn't want Russia to win this war. So the German bankers, the German Jews, Kuhn Loeb, and the other big banking firms in the United States refused to finance France or England to the extent of $1. They stood aside and they said, as long as France and England are tied up with Russia, not 1 cent. But they poured money into Germany. They fought with Germany against Russia, trying to lick the Tsarist regime. Now, those same Jews, when they saw the possibility of getting Palestine, they went to England and they made this deal. At that time, everything changed, like the traffic light that changes from red to green, where the newspapers had been all pro-German, where they'd been telling the people the difficulties that Germany was having fighting Great Britain commercially. All of a sudden, the Germans were no good. They were villains. They were Huns. They were shooting Red Cross nurses. They were cutting off babies' hands, and they were no good. Well, shortly after that, Mr. Wilson declared war on Germany. The Zionists in London sent these cables to the United States, to Justice Brandeis, go to work on President Wilson. We're getting from England what we want. Now you go to work and you go to work on President Wilson and get the United States into the war. And that did happen. That's how the United States got into the war. We had no more interest in it. We had no more right to be in it. Now the war, World War I, in which the United States participated, had absolutely no reason to be our war. We went in there, we were railroaded into it. If I can be vulgar, we were suckered into that war merely so that the Zionists of the world could obtain Palestine. Now, that is something that the people in the United States have never been told. They never knew why we went into World War I. Now, what happened? After we got into the war, the Zionists went to Great Britain and they said, well, we performed our part of the agreement. Let's have something in writing that shows that you are going to keep your bargain and give up Palestine after you win the war. Because they didn't know whether the war would last another year or another 10 years. So they started to work out a receipt. The receipt took the form of a letter, and it was worded in very cryptic language so that the world at large wouldn't know what it was all about. And that was called the Balfour Declaration. The Balfour Declaration was merely Great Britain's promise to pay the Zionists what they had agreed upon as a consideration for getting the United States into the war. So this great Balfour Declaration that you hear so much about is just as phony as a $3 bill.
Wait a minute. This letter was sent by Arthur James Balfour to Lord Rothschild, a member of the Rothschild family. The former was the foreign minister of Great Britain, while the latter was a member of the Rothschild's family.
And I don't think I can make it more emphatic than that. Now, that is where all the trouble started. The United States was in the war. The United States crushed Germany. We went in there, and it's history, you know what happened. Now, when the war was ended, and the Germans went to Paris, to the Paris Peace Conference in 1919, there were 117 Jews there as a delegation representing the Jews, headed by Bernard Baruch. I was there, I ought to know. Now what happened? The Jews at that peace conference, when they were cutting up Germany and parceling out Europe to all these nations that claimed a right to a certain part of European territory, the Jews said, how about Palestine for us? And they produced, for the first time, to the knowledge of Germans, this Balfour Declaration. So the Germans, for the first time, realized, oh, that was the game. That's why the United States came into the war. And the Germans, for the first time, realized that they were defeated. They suffered this terrific reparations that was slapped onto them because the Zionists wanted Palestine. And they were determined to get it at any cost. Now that brings us up to another very interesting point. When the Germans realized this, they naturally resented it. Up to that time, the Jews had never been better off in any country in the world than they had been in Germany. You had Mr. Rosenow there, who was maybe 100 times as important in industry and finance as Bernard Baruch in this country. You had Mr. Ballin, who owned the two big steamship lines, the North German Lloyd and the Hamburg American line, thank you. You had Mr. Bleitzroeder, who was the banker for the Hohenzollern family. You had the Warburgs in Hamburg, who were the big merchant bankers, the biggest in the world. The Jews were doing very well in Germany. No question about that. Now, the Germans felt, well, that was quite a sellout. Well, that's how the Germans felt towards these Jews. We've been so nice to them, and from 1905 on, when the first communist revolution in Russia failed and the Jews had to scramble out of Russia, they all went to Germany, and Germany gave them refuge, and they were treated very nicely. And here, they sold Germany down the river for no reason at all, other than they wanted Palestine as a so-called Jewish commonwealth. Now, Nahum, Sokolow, all the great leaders, the big names that you read about in connection with Zionism today, they, in 1919, 1920, 21, 22, and 23, they wrote in all their papers, and the press was filled with their statements, that the feeling against the Jews in Germany is due to the fact that they realized that this great defeat was brought about by our intercession and bringing the United States into the war against them. The Jews themselves admitted that. It wasn't that the Germans in 1919 discovered that a glass of Jewish blood tasted better than Coca-Cola or Münchner beer. There was no religious feeling. There was no sentiment against those people merely on account of their religious beliefs. It was all political. It was economic. It was anything but religious. Nobody cared in Germany whether a Jew went home and pulled down the shades and said Shema Yisrael or Our Father. No one cared in Germany any more than they do in the United States. Now, this feeling that developed later in Germany was due to one thing, that the Germans held the Jews responsible for their crushing defeat for no reason at all, because World War I was started against Germany for no reason for which they were responsible. They were guilty of nothing, only of being successful. They built up a big navy. They built up world trade. You must remember, Germany, at the time of Napoleon, at the time of the French Revolution, what was the German Reich consisted of 300 small city-states, principalities, dukedoms, and so forth. 300 little separate political entities. And between that time, between the period between Napoleon and Bismarck, they were consolidated into one state. And within 50 years after that time, they became one of the world's great powers. Their navy was rivaling Great Britain. They were doing business all over the world. They could undersell anybody and make better products. And what happened? What happened as a result of that? There was a conspiracy between England, France, and Russia that we must slap down Germany, because there isn't one historian in the world that can find a valid reason why those three countries decided to wipe Germany off the map politically. Now, what happened after that? When Germany realized that the Jews were responsible for her defeat, they naturally resented it. But not a hair on the head of any Jew was harmed. Not a single hair. Professor Tanzel of Georgetown University, who had access to all the secret papers of the State Department, wrote in his book and quoted from a State Department document written by Hugo Schoenfeld, a Jew who Cordell Hull sent to Europe in 1933 to investigate the so-called camps of political prisoners. And he wrote back that he found them in very fine condition. They were in excellent shape. Everybody treated well. And they were filled with communists. Well, a lot of them were Jews, because the Jews happened to be maybe 98% of the communists in Europe at that time. And there were some priests there and ministers, labor leaders, Masons, and others who had international affiliation. Now, the Jews sort of tried to keep the lid on this fact. They didn't want the world to really understand that they had sold out Germany and that the Germans resented that. Now, after a while, the Jews of the world didn't know what to do, so they called a meeting in Amsterdam. Jews from every country in the world attended in July 1933. And they said to Germany, you fire Hitler and you put every Jew back into his former position, whether he was a communist, no matter what he was. You can't treat us that way. And we, the Jews of the world, are calling upon you and serving this ultimatum upon you. Well, the Germans told them, you can imagine. So what did they do? In 1917, the communists took over Germany for a few days. Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht and a group of Jews in Germany took over the government for 3 days. In fact, when the Kaiser ended the war, he fled to Holland because he thought the communists were going to take over Germany as they did Russia, and that he was going to meet the same fate that the Tsar did in Russia. So he left and went to Holland for safety, for security. Now, at that time, when the communist threat in Germany was quashed, it was quiet, the Jews were working still, trying to get back into their former status, and the Germans fought them in every way they could without hurting a hair on anyone's head. The same as one group, the prohibitionists, fought the people who were interested in liquor, and they didn't fight one another with pistols. They did it every way they could. Well, that's the way they were fighting the Jews in Germany. And at that time, mind you, there were 80 to 90 million Germans, and there were only 460,000 Jews. Less than 1/2% of the population of Germany were Jews. And yet, they controlled all the press, they controlled most of the economy, because they had come in and with cheap money, you know the way the mark was devalued, they bought up practically everything. Well, in 1933, when Germany refused to surrender, mind you, to the World Conference of Jews in Amsterdam, they broke up, and Mr. Untermeyer came back to the United States, who was the head of the American delegation and the president of the whole conference, and he went from the steamer to ABC and made a radio broadcast throughout the United States in which he said, the Jews of the world now declare a holy war against Germany. We are now engaged in a sacred conflict against the Germans, and we are going to starve them into surrender. We are going to use a worldwide boycott against them that will destroy them because they are dependent upon their export business. And it is a fact that 2/3 of Germany's food supply had to be imported. And it could only be imported with the proceeds of what they exported, their labor. So if Germany could not export, 2/3 of Germany's population would have to starve. There just was not enough food for more than 1/3 of a population. Now, in this declaration, which I have here, it was printed and a whole page, in the New York Times on August 7th, 1933, Mr. Samuel Untermeyer boldly stated that this economic boycott is our means of self-defense. President Roosevelt has advocated its use in the NRA, which some of you may remember, where everybody was to be boycotted unless they followed the rules laid down by the New Deal, which of course was declared unconstitutional by the Supreme Court at that time. Nevertheless, the Jews of the world declared a boycott against Germany, and it was so effective that you couldn't find one thing in any store anywhere in the world with the words made in Germany on it. In fact, an executive of the Woolworth Company told me that they had to dump millions of dollars worth of crockery and dishes into the river, that their stores were boycotted. If anyone came in and found a dish marked made in Germany, they were picketed with signs, Hitler, murderer, and so forth, and like something like these sit-ins that are taking place in the South. R.H. Macy, which is controlled by a family called Strauss, who also happen to be Jews, a woman found stockings there, which came from Chemnitz, marked made in Germany. Well, they were cotton stockings. They may have been there 20 years, because since I've been observing women's legs in the last 20 years, I haven't seen a pair with cotton stockings on them. So Macy, I saw Macy boycotted with hundreds of people walking around with signs, murderers and Hitlerites and so forth. Now, up to that time, not one hair of any Jew had been hurt in Germany. There was no suffering, there was no starvation, there was no murder, there was nothing. Now, that, naturally, the Germans said, why, who are these people to declare a boycott against us and throw all our people out of work and our industries come to a standstill? Who are they to do that to us? And they naturally resented it. Certainly they painted swastikas on stores owned by Jews. Why should a German go in and give their money to a storekeeper who is part of a boycott, who is going to starve Germany into surrender into the Jews of the world, who are going to dictate who their premier or chancellor was to be? Well, it was ridiculous. That continued for some time. And it wasn't until 1938 when a young Jew from Poland walked into the German embassy in Paris and shot one of the officials that the Germans really started to get rough with the Jews in Germany. And you found them then breaking windows and having street fights and so forth. Now, for anyone to say that, I don't like to use the word anti-Semitism because it's meaningless, but it means something to you still, so I'll have to use it. The only reason that there was any feeling in Germany against Jews was that they were responsible, number one, for World War I, number two, for this worldwide boycott, and number three, did I say for World War I, they were responsible for the boycott and also for World War II, because after this thing got out of hand, it was absolutely necessary for the Jews and Germany to lock horns in a war to see which one was going to survive. In the meanwhile, I had lived in Germany, and I knew that the Germans had decided Europe is going to be Christian or communist. There is no in-between. It's going to be Christian or it's going to be communist. And the Germans decided, we're going to keep it Christian if possible. And they started to rearm. And their intention was, by that time, the United States had recognized the Soviet Union, which they did in November 1933. The Soviet Union was becoming very powerful, and Germany realized, well, our turn is going to come soon unless we are strong. The same as we in this country are saying today, our turn is going to come soon unless we're strong, and our government is spending $83 or $84 billion of your money for defense, they say. Defense against who? Defense against 40,000 little Jews in Moscow that took over Russia and then, in their devious ways, took over control of many other governments of the world. Now, for this country to now be on the verge of a third world war from which we cannot emerge a victor is something that staggers my imagination. I know that nuclear bombs are measured in terms of megathons. A megathon is a term used to describe 1 million tons of TNT. 1 million tons of TNT TNT is a megaton. Now, our nuclear bombs had a capacity of 10 megatons, 10 million tons of TNT. That was when they were first developed 5 or 6 years ago. Now, the nuclear bombs that are being developed have a capacity of 200 megatons. And God knows how many megatons the nuclear bombs that the Soviet Union has. So what do we face now? If we trigger a world war that may develop into a nuclear war, humanity is finished. And why will it take place? It will take place because Act 3, the curtain goes up on Act 3. Act 1 was World War I. Act 2 was World War II. Act 3 is going to be World War III. The Jews of the world, the Zionists, and their co-religionists everywhere are determined that they are going to again use the United States to help them permanently retain Palestine as their foothold for their world government. Now that is just as true as I'm standing here, because not alone have I read it, but many here have read it, and it's known all over the world. Now, going to do. The life you save may be your son. Your boys may be on their way to that war tonight, and you don't know it any more than you knew that in 1916 in London, the Zionists made a deal with the British War Cabinet to send your sons to war in Europe. Did you know it at that time? Not a person in the United States knew it. You weren't permitted to know it. Who knew it? President Wilson knew it. Colonel House knew it. Others knew it. Did I know it? I had a pretty good idea of what was going on. I was liaison to Henry Morgenthau Sr. in the 1912 campaign when President Wilson was elected. And there was talk around the office there. I was confidential man to Henry Morgenthau Sr., who was chairman of the Finance Committee, and I was liaison between him and Rollo Wells, the treasurer. So I sat in these meetings with President Wilson at the head of the table and all the others, and I heard them drum into President Wilson's brain the graduated income tax and what has become the Federal Reserve, and also indoctrinate him with the Zionist movement. And Justice Brandeis and President Wilson were just as close as the two fingers on this hand. And President Woodrow Wilson was just as incompetent when it came to determining what was going on as a newborn baby. And that's how they got us into World War I, why we all slept. Send our boys over there to be slaughtered for what? So the Jews can have Palestine as their commonwealth. They fooled you so much that you don't know whether you're coming or going. Now, any judge, when he charges a jury, says, gentlemen, any witness that you find has told a single lie, you can disregard all his testimony. That is correct. I don't know from what states you come, but in New York State, that is the way the judge addresses a jury. If that witness said one lie, disregard his testimony. Now, what are the facts? The Jews, I call them Jews to you because they're known as Jews. I don't call them Jews. I refer to them as so-called Jews because I know what they are. Now what happened? The Eastern European Jews, who form 92% of the world's population, of those people who call themselves Jews, were originally Khazars. They were a warlike tribe that lived deep in the heart of Asia. And they were so warlike that even the Asiatics drove them out of Asia into Eastern Europe. And to reduce this, so you don't get too confused about the history of Eastern Europe, they set up this big Khazar kingdom, 800,000 square miles. Only there was no Russia, there were no other countries, and the Khazar kingdom was the biggest country in all Europe. So big and so powerful that when the other monarchs wanted to go to war, the Khazars would loan them 40,000 soldiers. That's how big and powerful they were. Now, they were phallic worshippers, which is filthy. I don't want to go into the details of that now. It was their religion, the way it was the religion of many other pagans or barbarians elsewhere in the world. Now, the king became so disgusted with the degeneracy of his kingdom that he decided to adopt a so-called monotheistic faith, either Christianity, Islam, the Muslim faith, or what is known today as Judaism, really Talmudism. So, like spinning a top, he said, eeny, meeny, miny, mo, and he picked out so-called Judaism. And that became the state religion, and he sent down to the Talmudic schools of Tel Aviv and Surah, and brought up thousands of these rabbis with their teachings, and he opened up synagogues and schools in his kingdom of 800,000 people, 800,000 square miles, and maybe 10 to 20 million people, and they became what we call Jews. There wasn't one of them that ever had an ancestor that ever put a toe in the Holy Land, not alone in Old Testament history, but back to time, the beginning of time. Not one of them. And yet they come to the Christians and they ask us to support their armed insurrection in Palestine by saying, well, you want to certainly help repatriate God's chosen people to their promised land, their ancestral homeland. Now imagine how silly it was for the Christians, for the great Christian countries of the world to say, we are going to use our power, our prestige, to help repatriate God's chosen people to their ancestral homeland, their promised land. Now, could there be a bigger lie than that? Could there be a bigger lie than that? And because they control the newspapers, the magazines, the radio, the television, the book publishing business, they have the ministers in the pulpit, they have the politicians on the soapboxes talking the same language, so naturally you believe black is white if you heard it often enough. You wouldn't call black black anymore, you'd start to call black white, and nobody could blame you. Now, that is one of the great lies, that is the foundation of all the misery that has befallen the world.
Do you believe the Jews manipulate the United States into creating the Jewish nations of Israel? Joe Biden was the Vice President of the United States, as well as an active advocate of the New World Order.
A new world order. A new world order.
If you don't believe it, let Joe Biden tell you the truth.
America's support for Israel's security is unshakable, and I want to make it clear, it's not based merely on our moral commitment to Israel, but on our mutual national security interest. Ladies and gentlemen, if there were not an Israel, we would have to invent one. If there were not an Israel, we would have to invent one. If there were not an Israel, we would have to invent one in order to make sure our interests were preserved.
If you don't believe Jews control the most powerful countries such as the UK, France, and the United States as their proxy to carry out their plan to dominate the world, please listen to the comment of Mr. Mahathir Mohamad, the former Malaysian Prime Minister.
But today the Jews rule this world by proxy. They get others to fight and die for them. They invented socialism, communism, human rights and democracy so that persecuting them would appear to be wrong, so they may enjoy equal rights with others. With these, they have now gained control of the most powerful countries, and they, this tiny community, have become a world power.
Now let me show you how history repeated itself in the Second World War.
September the 7th, 1940. It was a day that shook the world because Germany turned its warlike attention to England's civilian population to try to break its spirit. The Blitz on London was a new departure. Night after night, wave upon wave of German bombers dropped high explosives and firebombs on what were essentially non-military targets. Hitler had declared his intention to reduce the city to a pile of rubble. Throughout the 3 months of the Blitz, 20,000 men, women and children were killed, and just over the same number seriously wounded. Throughout the Blitz, the King and Queen had stayed at Buckingham Palace, which itself was hit by firebombs. Their identification with the suffering of the Londoners did almost as much as Winston Churchill's leadership to inspire the nation to victory.
London suffered serious direct bombardments from Germany, and the UK was faced with ultimate defeat. The British War Cabinet openly asked for help from and pledged support to the Jews in the United States, as they did in the First World War. On October 6, 1940, in the New York Times on page 10, there was an article called New World Order Pledge to Jews. Arthur Greenwood, a member of the British War Cabinet, pledged to the Jews in the United States a New World Order. It stated that when we have achieved victory, as we assuredly shall, the nations will have the opportunity of establishing a new world order based on the ideals of justice and peace. The United States was a latecomer in the Second World War. By the time the United States entered the war in December 1941, Germany had occupied most of Europe. Furthermore, Japan was also starting to attack countries in Asia. But the U.S. decision to enter the World War meant the entire country switched to devoting all its human and material resources to defeating the Axis powers of Germany, Japan and Italy. After World War II, let's see how the UK fulfilled her promise. However, we have to go back to earlier history. By the end of World War I, 4 major imperial powers, namely the German, Russian, Austro-Hungarian and Ottoman empires, had been militarily and politically defeated. The Austro-Hungarian and Ottoman empires ceased to exist after the war. The Sykes-Picot Agreement of 1916 was a secret agreement between the governments of the UK and France. Britain secretly arranged with its allies to divide up Ottoman territories, defining their respective spheres of influence and control in Western Asia after the expected downfall of the Ottoman Empire during World War I. Following World War I, Britain arranged for the League of Nations to make Palestine a British mandate, which is to say, a colony to be administered by Britain and prepared for independence. France took control over Syria. The Balfour Declarations of 1917, proposed by the Foreign Minister Arthur James Balfour, was a formal statement of policy by the British government stating their view, which favored establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people. From 1933 to the end of World War II, the struggle between the fake Jews and the German was initiated by the worldwide boycott of the German goods, developing into social conflicts between them and later into the Holocaust persecuted by Nazi Germany. The invasion of God's people to Palestine was relatively limited until the 1930s, when Hitler came to power. The US and Europe closed their doors to immigration by desperate Jews, making Palestine one of the few options. From 1936 to 1939, waves after waves of Jewish migration into Palestine caused to the outbreak of an Arab revolt in Palestine, with serious clashes between Arabs and Jews. The British Pale Commission, formerly known as the Palestine Royal Commission, was established to carry out an inquiry into the increased violence. It recommended the partition of Palestine into a smaller Jewish state, a much larger Arab state united with Transjordan, and a small continuing British presence in Jerusalem, Jaffa, and the road between the two cities. Most of the Jews welcomed the plan. The Arabs, however, rejected and resist on British governance. This created a greater problem affecting the British rule. As a result, in May 1939, the British government invited Arab and Jewish leaders to the St. James Palace in London to resolve the problem. After the meeting, British released a white paper of concessions to the Arabs. It includes the following: a statement that Britain had no intention to make the area into a Jewish state. It was to be a small-scale center only. Restrictions on inflow of Jewish migrants into the region, and another restriction on sales of land to the Jewish people. The Jews were greatly disappointed. 8 days after the release of the white paper, a U.S. senator as well as a 33rd-degree Mason, Harry Truman, denounced Britain for violating its solemn promise and poor moral responsibility. During World War II, Truman became Vice President of the U.S. Interestingly, Truman wanted to help the Jewish people. However, his boss, U.S. President Roosevelt, was not eager to help the Jewish people in Europe. President Roosevelt took a more passive position in order to please the Arabs. On April 5, 1945, he promised the King of Saudi Arabia that the U.S. would consult the Arabs about Palestine policy. Just 8 days after this promise, Roosevelt suddenly died of sickness. Truman took an oath on the same day and became the 33rd President of the United States. So suddenly, Truman became a most powerful man who could help the Jewish people. To Truman, the end of the world brought a new political reality as well as bringing the horrendous revelation of massive murder of Jews in the Holocaust. After the war, the government of the United Kingdom requested that the Palestine issue be placed on the agenda of the United Nations General Assembly. They asked the Assembly make recommendations under Article 10 of the Charter concerning the future government of Palestine. Furthermore, the US and the USSR cooperated to solve the problem of the Jewish migrants isolated in Europe after the war. As a result, they recommend a partition plan for Palestine to the United Nations General Assembly. The proposed plan divided the area into 3 portions: a Jewish state, an Arab state, and an international zone around Jerusalem. The Truman administration postponed the voting in the General Assembly twice because there were insufficient favorable votes. According to the U.S. Congressional Record, page 1176, December 18, 1947, great pressure was put on member states of the United Nations who had already made up their minds to change their minds again. Haiti, Liberia, and the Philippines were overnight voting for partition, while China and Ethiopia were successfully persuaded to abstain.
United Kingdom, abstain. United States, yes. Uruguay, yes. Venezuela, yes. Yemen, no. Yugoslavia, abstain.
The resolution of the Dutch Committee for Palestine was adopted by 33 votes, 13 against, 10 abstentions.
So the proposed plan was successfully passed on November 29, 1947. So Truman was the principal sponsor of the partition plan and who turned the green light, allowing the massive invasion of the people of God into the land of Israel. The proposed plan was accepted by all the leaders of the Jewish community in Palestine and in the world. The State of Israel declared independence on May 14, 1948. However, the plan was rejected by leaders of the Arab community. War immediately broke out on the same day. 11 countries or organizations including Egypt, Jordan, and Lebanon joined together to defend the Palestinian people. During the 1948 war, around 720,000 Palestinians out of the 900,000 who lived in the territories fled or were expelled from their home. The photo shows Palestinians leaving Haifa as Zionist forces entered the city in April 1948. Besides the forced expulsion, as foretold by Ezekiel, the people of God or Zionists invade the land of unwalled villages. More than 500 defenseless Palestinian villages were destroyed. The Palestinian village of Safari is one of these Palestinian villages that was depopulated and destroyed in 1948. The people there, including Palestinian Arabs and real Jews, were a peaceful and unsuspecting people, all of them living without walls and without gates and bars. However, they were forced to leave their homeland and even suffered from ethnic cleansings. Let's take the Day Yasin massacre for an example. Just 6 days before the declarations of independence of the nation of Israel, around 120 Zionist fighters attacked the Day Yasin, located 3 miles east of Jerusalem. Deir Yassin was a Palestinian Arab village of roughly 600 people. The assault occurred as Jewish militias sought to relieve the blockade of Jerusalem during the civil war that preceded the end of the British rule in Palestine. Around 107 villagers were killed during and after the Battle of the Village, including women and children. On the other side, by the end of the First World War in 1914, Jewish population comprised 12% of the total population in Palestine. Most of them were the real Jews. A small-scale exodus of the real Jews had begun in many countries in the early decades of the 20th century, although the only substantial return came from Yemen and Syria. As the armed conflict in Palestine intensified, the real Jews in Arab and Muslim states suffered persecutions. The Arab-Israeli wars in 1948 and 1967 created hostility against local real Jews in North Africa and Middle East, resulting in pogroms, government-sponsored discrimination, and other hostility that drove many real Jews out of Arab states. As a result, 850,000 real Jews, primarily of African and Oriental background, returned to the land of Israel from Arab and Muslim countries, mainly from 1948 onwards. 50% of them from northwestern African countries of Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, and Libya, 10% from Egypt, 5% from Yemen, 10% from Syria and Turkey, 15% from Iraq, and 20% from Iran. This portion of the returns of the real Jews fulfilled the prophecies of Isaiah. Isaiah 11:10-12 states,
"In that day, the root of Jesse will stand as a banner for the peoples. The nations will rally to him, and his resting place will be glorious. In that day, the Lord will reach out his hand a second time to reclaim the surviving remnant of his people from Assyria, from Lower Egypt, from Upper Egypt, from Cush, from Elam, from Babylonia, from Hamad, and from the islands of the Mediterranean. He will raise a banner for the nations and gather the exiles of Israel. He will assemble the scattered people of Judah from the 4 quarters of the earth."
Now I think you may know that the restoration of Israel in the Bible refers to those surviving remnants of the real people of Israel.
From Assyria, from Lower Egypt, from Upper Egypt, from Cush, from Elam, from Babylonia, from Hamad, and from the islands of the Mediterranean.
Remember, not from Europe. Those fake Jews from Europe are the people of God, and who are now hijacking the name and the land of Israel for the purpose of creating their own Zionist kingdom. Nowadays, there are 5.7 million Jews living in Israel. Around 1 million of them are real Jews and 4.7 million are fake European Jews. More importantly, please be reminded that 3 million of them came from Russia, comprising 64% of the total population of the fake Jews in Israel today. In the American Standard Bible Version, Prophet Ezekiel calls God the Prince of Wrath, saying, "Son of man, set thy face towards God, of the land of Magog, the prince of Rosh, Meshech, and Tubal, and prophecies against him. As I have previously mentioned, the term of Russia comes from the late 11th century AD Wiccan word of Rush. Unfortunately, many Christians misinterpret Rosh as the present state of Russia. They claim that Russia will lead its coalition to invade the land of Israel. What the Bible refers to here is not the Russian army of Putin, but the Russian fake Jews who have been occupying the land of Israel since 1948. Many of us agree that Jesus will come after God's invasion of the land of Israel. Now, I would like to remind you that God is already there in the land of Israel. Also, as I have previously mentioned, the city of Jerusalem will become the religious and judiciary capital of the world empire. In order to ensure the security of this capital, the fake Jews have been capturing more and more Palestinian land, not only to strengthen their rule over the proper regions of Israel, but also to get rid of the Palestinian Arabs and even the real Jews. The land in green is called Palestine, where the Palestinian Christians, Jews, and Arabs were harmoniously living together for centuries. After God's invasion, more and more land has changed from green to white as the fake Jews occupy more and more land. The real Jews also often suffer from persecution by the white Jews. Ezekiel in chapter 38:12 states that God will turn his hand against the people gathered from the nations, the real Jews. Let's take the persecution against Ethiopian Jews as an example.
Thousands of Ethiopian Jews have flooded the streets of a southern Israeli town to protest against discrimination. The demonstration is a response to a recent story broadcast on Israeli TV that has upset the Ethiopian community. It showed how an Ethiopian family was unable to buy a flat in a part of the town because residents had earlier agreed amongst themselves not to sell property to Ethiopians. Graffiti reading "Ethiopian price tag," alluding to recent right-wing attacks, was recently sprayed on walls and vehicles in protest against Ethiopians living in the area. This member of the Ethiopian community said the children are suffering from constant discrimination. Ministers seemed to understand.
I think what we are looking here today is thousands of Ethiopians saying here for the Israeli society, not for the discrimination, not for racism. All of us, we came here to Israel to be equal with the Israeli society.
40 years ago, Israel's chief rabbis determined that Ethiopian Jews were descendants of the Jewish biblical tribe of Dan and were entitled to immigrate to Israel. Since then, a steady wave of Ethiopian Jews have been making aliyah and moving to Israel. However, the 110,000-strong Ethiopian community in Israel has long complained of prejudice. The government recently reduced the number of Ethiopian Jews it allows into the country, which prompted mass protests by community members. And there have been reports over the past years that some Jewish schools have not allowed Ethiopians into their classrooms.
Yep. Believe it or not, the Israeli government has been forcibly administering birth control to a segment of its population. For the first time, an Israeli government official has publicly acknowledged their practice of injecting Ethiopian Jewish women against their will with contraceptives. Israel is a country that has experienced a significant influx of Ethiopian immigrants during the last 2 decades. Now, some 130,000 Ethiopians, most of whom are Jewish, live in the country. However, the Ethiopian minority population is heavily marginalized and segregated. Not to mention they experience exponentially higher poverty and unemployment rates than that of native Israelis.
Even though the real Jews know the truth about the fake Jews, they dare not to speak out or confront them. However, in the very end time, Prophet Daniel in 11 verses 31 to 32 foretells that God's armed forces will rise up to desecrate the temple fortress and will abolish the daily sacrifice. Then they will set up the abomination that caused desolation. With flattery he will corrupt those who have violated the covenant, but the people who know their God will firmly resist him. I'm sure that real Jews will one day turn to Jesus. Then they will resist the fake Jews. However, they will suffer from more serious persecution and will continue to pray to the Lord to help them. The Lord will send two witnesses, possibly Moses and Elijah, to save the real Jews and to strike the earth, especially the nations of the beast, with every kind of plague as often as they want. The New World Order is nearly completely accomplished. Now let's explore what the fake Jews are going to do for establishing their one world government in Jerusalem. Third World War is of course their prime strategy. What war can do is clean things up. War can enable them to solve the problem of current financial crisis of the U.S., establish a brand new environment for the world government to rule the world, and exert control over the global energy supply. World War III will comprise three major battles, one in East Asia, one in Europe, and one in the Middle East, corresponding to the battles of the U.S.-Japanese allies against China, NATO against Russia, and the Battle of Armageddon of the U.S.-led world coalition against Islamic State and/or Israel in Megiddo, Israel. After the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1990, the U.S. became the world's sole superpower. In recent decades, Russia and China have become more and more powerful in the international arena politically, economically, and militarily. The U.S. feels threatened by the rising of China and the revival of the glorious Russian Empire led by Putin. Let's take international trade for example. China, Russia, India, Brazil, and South Africa have just joined together to create a 100 billion BRICS bank headquartered in Shanghai, China. And that means more and more trades will be settled in yuan and rubles instead of dollars. So a currency war is heating up. Now China and Russia vetoed the US just to show that the US is no longer the sole superpower. And the US knows very well that with China and Russia against it, it will not be able to execute its plan to control as easily as it was 3 decades ago. If the US insists on maintaining its leading role in the world, war with Russia and China is a likely outcome soon. The dispute between the US and Russia over the issues of Ukraine, Syria, and Iran, as well as the dispute between China and Japan over the Diaoyu Island or Senkaku Islands, may lead to a World War III centering in Europe and East Asia respectively.
For the first time in 18 years, the United States and Japan have signed a new defense guideline while it enhances Japan's international peacekeeping capabilities. Our Na Young reports.
U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry says the new agreement is a historic transition in the defense relationship between the U.S. and Japan. Watchers say Monday's agreement will enhance U.S.-Japan cooperation in dealing with territorial disputes in the region. Speaking at a joint press conference in New York on Monday, Kerry also had a clear message on territorial disputes between China and Japan in the South China Sea.
Our treaty commitments to Japan's security remains ironclad and covers all territories under Japan's administration, including the Senkaku Islands.
The U.S.-Japan new defense guideline paves the way for the U.S. to involve in the war of Diaoyu Island. Once war breaks out in Europe and Asia, it may distract the attention of the U.S. on the bad economic conditions at home in the U.S. The U.S. supposedly thinks Russia and China will be destroyed by the war, and thereafter, through the mechanisms of an enhanced United Nations or federated unions, the United States may expect to be in a position to ask or even order the rest of the world to disarm and surrender their sovereignty to the federated unions. The rest of the world may dare not to say no if they realize the outcome of Russia and China after the war. By that time, the federated unions have taken the mantle of the one world government, and the U.S. will take up the role of the global police, and the worldwide U.S. military bases will become global police stations. The U.S. military will become the special agents of the new world government of the world empire of Satan. The elites will become the ruling class. The fake Jews will become the honorable citizens. The rest will become the subordinates, the working class, or even worse, slaves. According to their New World Order plan, the headquarters of the Federate Unions will move to Jerusalem. Therefore, there is an imminent need to take complete control over the Middle East by war in the Battle of Armageddon. The reasons for this battle is to secure Jerusalem as the capital of the one world government and to control the global supply of energy. Besides, the fake Jews wants to bring as many nations as possible to the Battle of Armageddon so that the United States and Israel can destroy them all at once. Henry Kissinger is not only a fake Jew but also a prominent advocate of the New World Order. He claimed in 1970s, "Control oil, you control nations." It is obvious that oil is essential to the economy of any nation in the world. In present day, the people, the government, and the nation cannot survive without oil. Controlling the supply of oil to nations will guarantee surrendering their sovereignty to the one who controls the oil supply, that is, the one world government. About half of the world oil reserves was found in the Middle East in 2013. Controlling the oil reserves in the Middle East can control the world supply of oil. Taking control over resources of the 7 Middle Eastern countries, with the exceptions of Iran for the moment, have already all been complete. Former Federal Reserve Chairman Alan Greenspan and many world leaders admitted that the Iraq War was really about oil, and former Treasury Secretary Paul O'Neill says that Bush planned the Iraq War before 9/11. Libya, Syria, Iran, and Russia are also all oil-producing countries. Indeed, we have extensively documented that the wars in the Middle East and North Africa are largely about oil and gas, and Ukraine may largely be about gas as well. The toppling of Yemen and Somalia are also aimed at controlling the oil shipping route between the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. According to their plan, Iran is the only sovereign nation left. Iran is also the only Islamic nation with large oil production capacity and military might in the Middle East left in the region. Therefore, Iran now becomes the final hurdle or obstacle. According to Revelation 16 and Ezekiel 38, 3 major things about the Battle of Armageddon against Israel are happening now in the Middle East. As I have told in chapter 13, the kings of the East, that is, ISIL and Khorasan Group, and the kings of the world, that is, the US-led coalition against Islamic State, are now fighting with each other along the dry Euphrates. They are going to deploy their troops to the plain of Megiddo for the battle. Besides, Ezekiel claims that Iran will join the US-led coalition. Now let's first explore how and why the Islamic State will go to Megiddo for war. Secondly, how and why the US-led coalition will go for war against Israel in Megiddo. And thirdly, how and why Iran will join the US-led coalition in the war. Islamic State is initially called Islamic State in Iraq and the Sham, or simply ISIS. The name clearly reflects its goal. The imminent target regions for the Islamic State to capture are of course Iraq and the Sham. The Sham is the region comprising Syria, Lebanon, Israel, and Sinai. Al-Aqsa Mosque, or the Noble Sanctuary, on top of the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, is the Islam's third most holy site. When the Islamic State declared statehood on June 29, 2014, they proclaimed Jerusalem the capital of the state.
بسم الله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله الحمد لله الذي رزقنا أن نهاجر في سبيل الله وننضم في هذه دولة إسلامية في العراق والشام، ونحمد الله الذي رزقنا وجمعنا مع هؤلاء الأسود دولة الإسلام في كل مكان. والحمد لله الذي رزقنا أن نبايع أمير المؤمنين أبي بكر القريشي البغدادي حفظه الله. يا أميرنا، لقد بايعنا على السمع والطاعة وبيعنا على الموت، فأبشروا يا أيها الكفار. والله العظيم لنطهر الجزيرة منكم يا أيها الأنجاز، ونفتح البيت المقدس منكم يا أيها اليهود. والله نحن مسلمين.
Without doubt, Jerusalem will naturally be their next target. However, Israel is now going to trigger them to come to invade the land. In late October 2014, Yehuda Klik, a rabbi advocating for Jews to be allowed to pray on the Temple Mount, was shot several times in an assassination attempt by a Palestinian man. The Palestinian gunman was shot dead a day later by police searching for him. This immediately resulted in frequent clashes at the complex and elsewhere in East Jerusalem between Palestinian stone throwers and Israeli riot police. In early November 2014, Israel closed the compound in Jerusalem walled Old City amid increasing Israeli-Palestinian violence around it. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas called the act of Israel a declaration of war on the Palestinian people, Palestinian religious sites, and a declaration of war on both the Arabs and Islamic states. As a matter of fact, both Jewish and Islamic extremists are trying to create such disturbances on the Temple Mount in order to ignite the region. Besides this incident, according to the prophecy of Daniel, the real Jews are the people who know their God will firmly resist the government of Israel and restore their sacrificial worship to the Lord underneath the Temple Mount at the archaeological site of the Second Temple. By that time, many Muslim nations will join the Islamic State and go for war for their holy site. Therefore, the front line of the battle between the Islamic State and the US-led coalition will shift from Iraq and Syria to Israel. Now let's proceed to the questions how and why the US will bring its coalition of the world to fight against Israel. I know that many of you may not easily agree with me that the US will wage war against Israel. You may say that the US and Israel are the closest allies and think that it is not possible for them to fight against each other. Yes, you are right. They have been the closest allies. However, we have to change our mindset. Please bear in mind that New World Order is their common goal, and they have common enemies who oppose them achieving their goal. So they set up a trap to bring the enemies to the plain of Megiddo to destroy them, getting rid of the hindrance of the New World government. Remember, this is a trap. The US and Israel are putting up a show to persuade the world the relationship between them changes from friends to adversaries. Before we go any further, I would like to give you some background about the two-state solution first. The two-state solution is the most widely endorsed diplomatic idea for Israeli-Palestinian peace since the Six-Day War in 1967. It has also been the U.S. national policy to deal with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict since the Bush administration.
My vision is two states, living side by side, in peace and security.
Two states, Israel and Palestine, living side by side in peace and security.
The two-state solution calls for the two states for two peoples. The two-state solution envisaged an independent state of Palestine alongside the Jewish state of Israel. Obama claims that the boundaries between the two states will be based on the 1967 borders. On March 16, 2015, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, in an interview the day before the general election of Israel, said that a Palestinian state would not be created if he remained Prime Minister.
כל מי שהולך להקים היום מדינה פלסטינית, כל מי שהולך לפנות שטח היום פשוט נותן שטח התקפה לאסלאם הקיצוני נגד מדינת ישראל. זו המציאות האמיתית שנוצרה כאן בשנים האחרונות. מי שלא מבין את זה פשוט טומן את ראשו בחול. השמאל עושה את זה, הוא טומן את ראשו בחול פעם אחר פעם.
אם אתה ראש ממשלה, לא תקום מדינה פלסטינית.
אכן.
אם אתה ראש ממשלה, לא תקום מדינה פלסטינית.
אכן.
אם אתה ראש ממשלה, לא תקום מדינה פלסטינית.
אכן.
The statement reversed Netanyahu's endorsement of a two-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in a 2009 speech at Bar-Ilan University and aroused Obama's suspicions that he was never really serious about peace negotiations. The new stand would further fray Netanyahu's ruinous relationship with the Obama administration and heighten tension with European countries already frustrated with the stalled peace process. Shortly after the election, Netanyahu changed his mind again.
Your hard turn right on the Palestinian issue, what you said about the Arab voters coming out in droves, they say are costing you support around the world.
Well, neither one is, the premises in your questions are wrong. I haven't changed my policy. I never retracted my speech in Bar-Ilan University 6 years ago, calling for a demilitarized Palestinian state that recognizes the Jewish state. What has changed is the reality. Abu Mazen, the Palestinian leader, refuses to recognize the Jewish state. He's made a pact with Hamas. We want that to change so we can realize a vision of real, sustained peace. And I don't want a one-state solution. I want a sustainable, peaceful two-state solution, but for that, circumstances have to change.
The White House announced that it would reevaluate the protections that Americans' veto in the Security Council has traditionally given Israel. The statement was an unprecedented threat to withdraw United States support for Israel at the United Nations.
We continue to believe that the best way to safeguard Israel's long-term security is to bring about a comprehensive peace between Israelis and Palestinians. Two states for two peoples living side by side in security and in peace. To achieve this, the United States has long advocated direct negotiations between Israelis and Palestinians. In 2009, Prime Minister Netanyahu publicly endorsed a two-state solution. Over the course of President Obama's administration, most recently with the tireless efforts of Secretary John Kerry, the United States has expended tremendous energy in pursuit of this goal. That's why the Prime Minister's comments on the eve of the election, in which he first intimated and then made very clear in response to a follow-up question that a Palestinian state will not be established while he is Prime Minister, were so very troubling. After the election, the Prime Minister said that he had not changed his position, but for many in Israel and in the international community, such contradictory comments call into question his commitment to a two-state solution, as did his suggestion that the construction of settlements has a strategic purpose of dividing Palestinian communities, and his claim that conditions in the larger Middle East must be more stable before a Palestinian state can be established. We cannot simply pretend that these comments were never made. We cannot simply pretend that these comments were never made. We cannot simply pretend that these comments were never made. In recent days, some have suggested our reaction to this issue is a matter of personal pique. Nothing could be further from the truth. America's commitment to a two-state solution is fundamental to U.S. foreign policy. It's been the goal of Republican and Democratic presidents, and it remains our goal today, because it is the only way to secure Israel's future as a Jewish and democratic state. That's why the President has said that we need to reevaluate our approach to the peace process. We need to reevaluate our approach to the peace process. We need to reevaluate our approach to the peace process and how we pursue the cause of peace, because, like each and every one of you, we care deeply, deeply about Israel and its future. We will look to the next Israeli government to match words with action and policies that demonstrate a genuine commitment to a two-state solution. And like every administration since President Johnson, we will continue to oppose settlement activity since it undermines the prospects of peace. In the end, we know what a peace agreement should look like. The borders of Israel and an independent Palestine should be based on the 1967 lines with mutually agreed swaps. Each state needs secure and recognized borders, and there must be robust provisions that safeguard Israel's security. An occupation that has lasted for almost 50 years must end, must end, must end, must end. And the Palestinian people... And the Palestinian people must have the right to live in and govern themselves in their own sovereign state.
In the past, let's say in the period from 1971 to 2011, the U.S. had exercised its veto power 42 times to block the United Nations resolutions critical to Israel. The new approach implies that the U.S. will no longer use her veto power to protect Israel from being requested by the Palestinians and European countries to withdraw to the border before 1967 at the United Nations Security Council. Apart from the changing tone of Netanyahu's statements about the two-state solution, Israel has not changed its aggression over expansion of settlement in the occupied territories too. In October 2014, the United Nations Security Council has held an emergency meeting on Israel's plan to build more illegal homes in occupied East Jerusalem. In the meeting, the U.S. harshly criticized Israel's decision to move forward with new settlements in East Jerusalem, adding that the plan could alienate Tel Aviv from even its coastless airlines.
Soon after the announcement of more than 1,000 new illegal settler homes in occupied East Jerusalem, the Palestinians requested this urgent meeting. The Palestinian ambassador described how the Israelis could be creating a new crisis point.
As long as they continue not to listen, peace will not move forward. On the contrary, we will face explosive situations such as the situation that we face today in East Jerusalem.
There was widespread condemnation of the fresh building of settlements, including unusually harsh language from the U.S. representative. The
United States is deeply concerned by these developments. We urge all parties to refrain from provocative actions, including settlement activity by Israeli authorities. Settlement activity will only further escalate tensions at a time that is already tense enough.
We just heard from the US representative in the Council describing your new announcement of settlements as provocative actions. How do you respond to such criticism coming from your close ally, the US?
I respond very clearly. Jerusalem is the eternal capital of the Jewish people, and building housing units in Jerusalem for children is something that we will continue to do, because Jerusalem is the eternal capital of the Jewish people.
On Israel for continuing constructions on Jewish homes in Jerusalem.
There could be a major development in the already tense relationship between President Obama and Israel's leadership. Chief White House correspondent Ed Henry joins us tonight from the North Lawn with the full story. Hi, Ed.
Good evening, Brett. When I pressed Josh Earnest today, he left the door wide open to the possibility of the U.S. issuing sanctions against Israel over settlement activity.
There are reports that the administration is considering sanctioning Israel over the settlements issue. I wonder if you could say true or false.
Well, I've been informed of some of these reports.
Now, privately, I'm hearing this would not be similar to the kinds of tough sanctions that have been leveled against the economies of Russia and Iran, perhaps sanctions that would be more symbolic, trying to get Israel's attention. But obviously, it would still be unprecedented and could make an already tense relationship with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu even worse after I asked Earnest to deny reports out of Israel that these sanctions are on the table. Listen.
We believe that settlements are illegitimate. and we have deep concerns about highly contentious planning and construction activities that the Israeli government is pursuing in East Jerusalem and the West Bank.
Now, Ernest would not deny the sanctions are on the table. He added that none of this is affecting the U.S. support for Israel's defense. But Republican Senator Kelly Ayotte called this whole idea absurd, adding, quote, protecting the national security interests of the United States requires strategic and moral clarity and an ability to distinguish between friends and adversaries. We should not confuse Israel, our closest and most reliable ally in the Mideast, with an adversary that needs to be pressured or coerced.
In the last decade, the U.S. and Israel wanted to make use of Iran developing nuclear weapons as an excuse to attack Iran. Russia and Syria openly support Iran. Israel vowed to destroy Iranian nuclear installations.
Iran and 6 world powers have reached a breakthrough preliminary agreement to curb Tehran's nuclear activities. The accord outlines a series of commitments by both sides as they work for a comprehensive deal aimed at ensuring Tehran will not make nuclear weapons in return for relief from sanctions. After a week of grueling negotiations aimed at ending a 12-year nuclear standoff between Iran and the West, negotiators emerged to say they achieved a landmark preliminary accord on Iran's nuclear activities.
Today we have reached a critical milestone in that quest. We, our P5+1 EU partners and Iran have arrived at a consensus on the key parameters of an arrangement that, once implemented, will give the international community confidence that Iran's nuclear program is and will remain exclusively peaceful.
The surprisingly broad and detailed framework commits Tehran to significant cuts in its nuclear assets and activities. If implemented, it will cap Tehran's nuclear advance for years to come. But analysts caution that nothing's agreed until everything is agreed. On his return from the negotiations in Switzerland, Iran's foreign minister received a hero's welcome. The agreement means an end to years of crippling economic sanctions for the Islamic Republic, but only if negotiators transform the plan into a comprehensive pact by a June 30th deadline. But for U.S. President Barack Obama, who has staked enormous political capital on the nuclear negotiations, achieving a deal with Iran would be a crowning foreign policy achievement.
This framework would cut off every pathway that Iran could take to develop a nuclear weapon. So this deal is not based on trust. It's based on unprecedented verification.
Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says he is vehemently opposed to the deal because it threatens the survival of Israel.
Israel and the United States agree that Iran should not have nuclear weapons. But we disagree on the best way to prevent Iran from developing those weapons. Now, disagreements among allies are only natural from time to time, even among the closest of allies.
The international communities appreciate the deal, and Obama hails the deal as historic. However, Netanyahu calls the deal threatens survival of Israel. What the U.S. and Israel are acting now is clear. They want the world to know that they are in trouble. The relationship between them is more like adversaries than friends. However, don't be deceived. They are putting a show only to tell you that they are enemies. Judging from these 3 recent conflicts, the relationships among the U.S., Israel, and Iran are changing. Friends become adversaries and adversaries become friends. Tension between the U.S. and Iran loosens, but tension between the U.S. and Israel tightens. The White House considers imposing sanctions against Israel for continuing constructions of Jewish homes in East Jerusalem, reassessing its policy over the Israeli-Palestinian peace deal, and facing opposition from Israel on the Iranian nuclear deal. The changing relationship among them fulfills the prophecies of Daniel and Ezekiel. Don't you remember Obama's first visit to Israel in 2013? Prophet Daniel foretold that during the last 7 years, Obama would come to Jerusalem to reaffirm the covenant with many. And then, during the middle of the last 7 years, he waged wars against Israel for Jerusalem. The covenant of this prophecy refers to a strong bond and alliance that infers eternity, an eternal bond between two entities. The recent visit of U.S. President Obama to Israel fulfills this prophecy. Interestingly enough, Obama made his first trip to Israel in his entire presidency and dubbed the theme of his trip the Unbreakable Alliance.
The United States is proud to stand with you as your strongest ally and your greatest friend.
On March 21, 2013, after his visit to Ramallah, he returned to Jerusalem on the same day and delivered a speech to a crowd of about 1,000, mostly university students and reporters. He stressed that.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, it is a great honor to be with you here in Jerusalem, and I'm so grateful for the welcome that I've received from the people of Israel. I bring with me the support of the American people and the friendship that binds us together. You know, over the last 2 days, I've reaffirmed the bonds between our countries with Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Perez. But what I've most looked forward to is the ability to speak directly to you, the Israeli people, especially so many young people who are here today. I'd like to focus on how we, and when I say we in particular, young people, can work together to make progress in 3 areas that will define our times: security, peace, and prosperity. Let me begin with security. I'm proud that the security relationship between the United States and Israel has never been stronger. Never.
In his speeches, he repeatedly reaffirmed Israel as U.S. strongest ally and greatest friend, unbreakable bond between the two nations, and the bond is eternal. This fully fulfills what Daniel had prophesied, that he would reaffirm a covenant within the last 7 years. Besides, the most wanted persons Obama wished to talk to in the trip is neither Netanyahu nor Perez, but the Israeli people, especially so many young people.
But what I've most looked forward to is the ability to speak directly to you, the Israeli people, especially so many young people who are here today.
This further fulfills what Daniel had prophesied, that he would reaffirm the covenant with many. Prophet Daniel points out that the one who comes to Jerusalem to reaffirm the covenant is also the one who will lead his army to invade the land of Israel in the middle of the last 7 years. Now, the present-day situations open up the wider prospect for Obama leading his coalition against the state of Israel to help the Palestinians establishing their nation. Furthermore, Ezekiel claims that there will be an abrupt change in the direction of God's army. A country's military is what usually goes off to war. Here the Lord said he will turn God around in the opposite direction to attack God's homeland. Formerly adversaries Persia, Kuz, and Put. That is the present-day Iran, Ethiopia, and Somalia and Libya become God's allies. As previously mentioned, the White House considers imposing sanctions against Israel for continuing to build Jewish homes in East Jerusalem. On the contrary, with the Iranian nuclear deal, the tension between the US and Iran relaxed, and the countries become more cooperative. Now the signal is very clear for the US. The US has shown the green light and let the problem solved in the United Nations. The French government responded to these situations very quickly on April 7, 2015. France has seen a window of opportunity following recent elections in Israel to get the United States on board for a renewed effort towards an Israeli-Palestinian settlement, and is immediately preparing a draft of the United Nations Security Council resolution. Without the US using its veto power, This draft is expected to be passed in the United Nations Security Council in the very near future. Before we go any further, let's refer to the Bible to discover the key role players in the Battle of Armageddon. There are 4 major key players in the end-time war. Revelation 20 points out that Gog and Magog will gather the nations of the earth and surround the camps of God's people in Jerusalem. Ezekiel 38 points out that God will lead the nations such as Iran, Ethiopia, and Somalia and Libya. Daniel 11 points out that when the armed forces of God or Antichrist desecrate the temple fortress and abolish daily sacrifice, the people who know their God will firmly resist him. Revelation 16 points out that not only kings from the east but also kings from the whole world will be involved in the Battle of Armageddon. All in all, there are 4 key players in the end-time war listed in the Bible. Both Gog and Magog are the fake Jews. To recap, the fake Jews of Caesarea once called themselves the people of God. They came from the land of Magog. The European Jews in turn are the people of God, captured the land of Israel in 1948. They hijacked the name and the land of Israel and are living there today. Obama is Magog because he is the 40th U.S. President. For details, please refer to Chapter 4, Gog, Bush, and Magog Obama. Dark-skinned Hebrew Jews are the real Jews who migrate to Israel from North Africa and other parts of the Middle East, who later converted to Christianity will become the people of God. As set out in Chapter 13, both ISIL and the Khorasan group are the kings of the East. The U.S. coalition or the kings of the world tried to destroy them in Syria and Iraq. Later they will come to attack Jerusalem. Presently, there are more than 60 nations joining the coalition led by the U.S., fighting against the Islamic State in Syria and Iraq. Iran, Libya, and other nations will join them when the coalition goes to war with Israel. What happens next? The ultimate end-time war comes. Gog and Magog lead the nations of the world to invade the land of Israel. You may wonder why the fake Jews, both in the U.S. and in Israel, bring war to their homeland of Israel. Remember, this is a trap to those nations that hate Israel and threaten the existence of Israel, especially Iran. The fake Jews gather all of them in the land of Israel and simultaneously destroy them. This is a cunning tactic intended to deceive the whole world. Explicitly, Israel and the U.S. disagree over several issues, namely the expansion of Jewish settlements in East Jerusalem, solution to Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and the means to control Iran's nuclear energy developments. Indeed, their roles are opposing, but their goal is the same. It is to get the nations to come to Israel. Actually, they are much more than allies. They are a family and the Synagogue of Satan as well. Let Netanyahu tell you the truth.
Israel and the United States agree that Iran should not have nuclear weapons. But we disagree on the best way to prevent Iran from developing those weapons. Now, disagreements among allies are only natural from time to time, even among the closest of allies. Israel and the United States will continue to stand together because America and Israel are more than friends. We're like a family. Now, disagreements in the family are always uncomfortable, but we must always remember that we are family. Rooted in a common heritage, upholding common values, sharing a common destiny. And that's the message I came to tell you today. Our alliance is sound, our friendship is strong, and with your efforts, it will get even stronger in the years. You're here to tell the world that our alliance is stronger than ever.
These fake Jews played a contrasting role but worked together towards their common goal to destroy the neighboring nations of Israel and establish a stronghold for the capital of the one world government in Jerusalem. What's next? There are several possibilities, but here I will mention just one concerning the restoration of sacrificial worship beneath the Temple Mount. In 1967, Israel captured East Jerusalem in the Six-Day War. Ever since then, control and management of the site have been granted to the Muslim Authority. The Israeli government will show its aggression and to take back control of the Temple Mount and allow Orthodox Jews to restore their sacrificial worship. However, worship will not be done on top of the Temple Mount. Instead, it will take place beneath it under the feet of the Gentiles, inside the archaeological reconstructed site of the Temple Mount at the same level of the East Gate. For details, please refer to chapter 7. Has the temple of the Lord been rebuilt under the feet of the Gentiles? Violent conflicts between the Palestinians and the Israelis will immediately break out. The U.S. will condemn this action, further violating the international consensus of the two-state solution, and put the matter to the United Nations Security Council. Of course, the United Nations Security Council wants to solve the decade-long Israeli-Palestinian conflict problem once and for all. So the Council will impose sanctions against Israel and set a deadline for Israel to withdraw from the 1967 border, or else face military action. But Israel will not withdraw. Now there are more than 60 nations serving in the US-led coalition force, fighting against Islamic State in Iraq and Syria. The U.S. will strengthen its coalition force by inviting more nations to join them. By this time, Iran, Libya, and some other countries will join. So this enlarged coalition will fight against Israel and the Islamic State. So the battle will shift from Iraq and Syria to Israel. The enlarged coalition will consolidate their military forces at Megiddo, Israel, before attacking Jerusalem. Israel will attack the coalition, possibly even using a nuclear weapon, right at the plain below Megiddo. Now you can see this is what we call the Battle of Armageddon. The coalition will attack Israel. The U.S. manipulates the coalition into destroying Palestinian villages rather than the large cities such as Tel Aviv. Ezekiel points out that the army of God will invade the land of unwalled villages. Israel has constructed many walls to separate the Jews and the Palestinians. As previously mentioned, many real Jews are living with the Palestinians in their villages. Do you know that the walls are constructed not with the intentions to protect the Palestinian villages, but the Jewish settlements? That is to say, the Zionist Jewish settlements are walled, and the Palestinian villages are unwalled. The Bible says God will come and invade the Palestinian villages. In the war, the Zionist Jews wants to get rid of the Palestinians as well as the real Jews. On the other side of the Muslim world, because the Al-Aqsa Mosque over the Temple Mount is a holy place for Muslims, they cannot accept its being ruled by non-Muslims. This is because such acceptance would betray the Islamic faith. So the Islamic State will call to all Muslims to join them in the fight to take back Jerusalem. Islamic State will be strengthened very quickly too. It will gather up many more Muslims to fight in the Israel war. However, by this time, the fake Jews, Israel and the US will join to wipe out the Muslim world and adversarial nations like Iran in one terrible war. The situation will be very complicated. Explicitly, the US and Israel are enemies, but in fact, they are the partners and are family members of the New World Order. The Islamic State and the US-led coalition are enemies, but Israel is their common enemy. Even within the enlarged coalition, they will kill one another. That is why Ezekiel points out that every man's sword will be against his brother in the war. During the war, the US will use biological weapons to kill its coalition enemies. Zechariah foresees a plague that the Lord will use to strike at all the nations that fight against Jerusalem. Their flesh will rot while they are still standing on their feet. Their eyes will rot in their sockets, and their tongues will rot in their mouths. The symptoms of the plague will be similar to Ebola. Once the war is over, the one world government will capture Jerusalem. They will trample on the holy city for 42 months. His armed forces will rise up to desecrate the temple fortress and will abolish the daily sacrifice. Then they will set up the abomination that caused desolation. They will elect a religious king as the supreme ruler. The Bible calls him the abomination of desolation, the lawless one, or the Antichrist. Then the Antichrist will sit on his throne to rule the world for 3.5 years. The fig Jews will rule the world from Jerusalem 3.5 years, or 42 months, or 1,260 days only. Be patient. Jesus will come to destroy them and rule the earth forever. The Antichrist will oppose and will exalt himself over everything that is called God or is worshipped, so that he sets himself up in God's temple, proclaiming himself to be God. His judiciary and religious capital will be set in Jerusalem. The name of his kingdom may be called the Federate Unions. The emblem of his kingdom is an all-seeing eye framed in a triangle. As mentioned in chapter 12, the all-seeing eye is the eye of the sun god, and the upward triangle represents Lucifer. Every nation should surrender their sovereignty to the Federate Unions. In order to acquire citizenship, every people in the world should take the rite of initiation. The rites of initiation include pledge, singing, and dancing. The rites bring men into spiritual bondage to Lucifer or Satan. We take David Spangler as an example. David Spangler, on page 45 of his book called Reflections on the Christ, teaches Lucifer comes to give to us the final gift of wholeness. If we accept it, then he is free and we are free. This is the Luciferic initiation. It is one that many people now and in the days ahead will be facing, for it is an initiation in the new age. Through the initiation, the humankind would completely embrace Lucifer and allow Lucifer to indwell in an unprecedented way. Spangler's vision is for a new global order ruled by Lucifer the Satan. The content of the oath or pledge is likely as the content of the praise songs of Lucifer in Vatican. Listen.
Flammas eius, Lucifer matutinus inveniat. Ille in quam Lucifer qui nescito casum, Christus filius tuus, qui regressus ab inferis, humano generis serenus iluxit, et tecum vivit et regnat in saecula saeculorum.
During the process of initiation, applicants may be required to raise their praising hand sign to Lucifer. Wait a minute, this is a warning of the Lord to his believers. Don't be deceived. Once the one world government is established, massive amount of people will take the initiation. Many people at a time sitting in front of the computer monitors. The mark of Lucifer instructs them verbally how to fill up their personal information and to make a pledge to Lucifer. The Bible says the beast was given power to give breath to the image of the first beast, so that the image could speak and cause all who refuse to worship the image to be killed. That is to say, everyone in the world will be forced to take the initiation. If not, they will be killed. After the initiation, the citizenship will be granted and an identity chip will be given and transplanted to him or her. With this chip, every person in the world is assigned an 18-digit tracking number consisting of 3 groups of 6 numbers. The first 3 numbers assigned by the computer to everyone are 666. The next numbers are a person's national code. For example, the national code of the US is 110. Then the next 3 numbers are a person's telephone area code. And finally, the last 9 digits are a person's 9-digit social security number. For the ruling class, special agents, and honorable citizens, the chips are transplanted in their right hands. But for the subordinates, working class or slave, the chips are transplanted in their foreheads. The Bible proclaims those who receive the mark with the number 666 of the beast will not be saved. This is not because the chips are a means of personal identification, but because the chips are obtained through Luciferian initiation. Many people in the world, especially Christians and Americans, are not willing to become citizens of the one world government because they will lose their freedom and the salvation of Jesus Christ. Riots and civil war may break out in America. Many Americans will be jailed and even be killed. That's the reason why the U.S. now become a police state. The police are equipped like the military. FEMA camps are found everywhere in the U.S. and many FEMA coffins are available too. Many people from all over the world will not want to become slaves of the New World Government. According to Kissinger's quotation, the One World Government will control the people by controlling their food supply. 95% of all grain reserves in the world today are under the control of 6 multinational agribusiness corporations: Cargill Grain Company, Continental Grain Company, Koch Industries Incorporation, Louis Dreyfus, Bunge Company, and Archer Daniels Midland Company. All these 6 companies are US-based. The US government will manipulate the global food supply through these companies. Worldwide famines can be expected, causing millions of people to starve to death. The time is coming, and which will be so terrible. A quarter of the world's population will be killed either by the sword, famine, plague, or by the wild beasts of the earth. No one on the earth can resist them except God's people and the 2 witnesses. The Lord will appoint 2 witnesses to strike the earth, especially the nations of the beast, with every kind of plague as often as they may. At the hardest time of human life on earth, the 7th angel will sound the last trumpet. Jesus will come back to rule the earth. His reign will be forever and ever. Before I say goodbye to you, I would like to let you know something about Hillary. It is important for the 2016 U.S. presidential election. In chapter 4, I refer to Hebrew words of Gog and Magog to tell you George Bush is Go Bush and Obama is Magog, the 40th Gog. Now I would like to refer to Greek words of Gog and Magog to call for your attention to the name of Hillary. The book of Revelation is written in Greek, according to Roosevelt D. Hitchcock's Bible Name Dictionary. Greek word of God means roof and or covering. Greek word of Magog means roof, covering, and or dissolving. Therefore, God is meant by mountain, while Magog is meant by dissolving mountain, small mountain, or simply hill. In 2008 presidential election, during the race for the Democratic nomination, Hillary Clinton traveled on a chartered jet with reporters. While she was flying on her campaign airline, pretended to be a flight attendant. Listen, how did she call the plane?
look out from the left, you'll see an America with a strong middle class at home and a strong reputation in the world. Once we've reached cruising altitude, we'll be offering in-flight entertainment, My Stuff speech, in its many variations. Once again, thank you for joining us on Hill Force One. We know you have choices when you fly, and so we are grateful. Once again, thank you for joining us on Hill Force One. We know you have choices when you fly, and so we are grateful. Once again, thank you for joining us on Hill Force One. We know you have choices when you fly, and so we are grateful.
Air Force One is the official air traffic control call sign of a United States Air Force aircraft carrying the President of the United States. Hillary Clinton called her plane Air Force One, as if she would be the one becoming the next President of the United States of the time. In terms of biblical significance, it is more important that she regards her name Hillary as Hill. If so, she can be regarded as a dissolving, covering roof, or Magor in the Bible. That is to say, George Bush is Gore, while both Obama and Hillary are Magor. If Hillary Clinton is elected U.S. President in 2016, she will stay in the great city of Babylon, that is New York City, as the whore of the Babylon and the administrative king. And the present Pope Francis or the resurrected Pope John Paul will become the religious king of the New World Government in Jerusalem. Christians, awake! The battle of Armageddon is coming soon. Jesus is also coming soon too. Pray for the faith of those brothers and sisters in our Lord Jesus Christ who are suffering from persecution. Pray for the real and fake Jews to repent and receive Jesus as their personal Savior. Pray for the forgiveness of our Lord Jesus to all humankind. Remember, Jesus is coming soon.